beginning, and here are the credits.
30 seconds. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunskyMysteries.com.
This is SETV.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Saturday night extravaganza. For the first time, we are now actually streaming audio over the web, and I see we have a fair number of people watching us on that. And, of course, right at the top of the show, I have a frog in my throat, which is perfectly appropriate. As you can see, we have expanded the studio quite a bit. We now have 3 monitors. I look like a supermodel when I do that, don't I? We now have three monitors. We have the audio server. We have the video server. We are currently streaming and recording the video, and we are streaming and recording the audio. Our guest tonight is coming back, I believe, for the 4th time. We have also developed and designed a page that revolves around his visits to the show. The link is there at the show page. You can go there and listen to all of the past shows as well as see all of the past shows, because we use a lot of visual stuff with the shows. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in our guest. Hopefully is back from getting his glass of water. I'm going to welcome in John Dinardo. John, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, Bill. Thanks for inviting me.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And I understand you also have gotten a rather extreme amount of snow out where you guys are.
You know, I think I overestimated it when I spoke to you earlier. I went outside again as I was shoveling. It's about 4 inches. Not too bad.
Okay. Well, that's about what we got here in Michigan, about 4 inches or so. So that's not too much to shovel. So tonight, folks, we thought we would basically do a free association type of episode. One of the things that we wanted to talk about, that we talked about earlier in our pre-show conversation, is here. It's obviously 2012. The year is here. This is supposed to be the year of catastrophes and everything else, and you're beginning to see on the internet, as well as on YouTube and on television, you're beginning to see people, I believe, in some cases, are blowing things out of proportion. They are using disinformation techniques to bring you various subjects and articles. And we wanted to talk about vetting these sources of information and different ways that you can do that. Excuse me. I'm going to hit my cough button while John tells us about some different ways to vet various sources on the internet. Go take it away, John.
Okay. When we many of us get these reports of various events, strange occurrences, such as masses of fish dying in the waters and masses of birds falling from the sky. Right now, there are numerous reports of shrilling sounds in the air, and some of the people are recording them, but I understand that they're not recorded very well because cell phones cannot detect those low-pitched sounds very well.
Yes.
But whenever we get these events occurring, we should try to authenticate them by going to newspapers and local newspapers, local radio stations, to try to get reports from the locale where these events occurred. And that would make them more credible if we could get them from local news sources in the area of the occurrence of the events. Or other news sources in general might be reporting them, like the BBC, for example, of Great Britain, or other major newspapers or broadcasting networks might have reports. And thank goodness for the Internet, because we can find all of these reports through the Internet.
You know, I have a recording of the trumpet sounds. I'm going to go ahead and play that now, since you were talking about that. I played it for you earlier. I think I played it for you earlier, but I'm not sure. I'm going to play it now so that everybody can hear it. Those of you on the audio stream, you may want to turn down your speakers a little bit. This will be loud, as well as people that have subwoofers at home. Make sure you unplug your subwoofers. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and play the trumpet sounds. I believe this comes from Europe. I forget the exact city. I just don't remember. Here is the trumpet sounds. Now, I've heard some of the most curious explanations for those sounds. Everything from tectonic plate sounds, plates grinding against each other, to air being sucked into caves and caverns, to giant UFO motherships hovering over the Earth. I'm not sure exactly which explanation I buy, but we're starting to see videos and different posts on news groups and discussion groups where people are saying the mystery sounds solved, and with some implausible explanation. John, do you have any idea what they could be?
Just an educated guess. I mean, as others have also suggested, these sounds might be the Earth shifting, the Earth's crust shifting on the mantle below the crust. The mantle is more or less like a pudding type of substance, or it's a molten rock. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine how thick and viscous and hot this mantle would be beneath the Earth's crust. The Earth's crust is about 400 miles deep, I believe, according to what I've read. So beneath that, if there is a shifting of that soft, heated material of the magma comprising the mantle beneath the crust, if it's beginning to shift, certainly these sounds would be enormous. They would have a very great depth to their pitch.
Right.
And that could be one explanation for it. Sounds like the Earth groaning. But again, it's just my impression that I have. We have to continue to follow scientific analysis and reports of this shrilling sound. And I was just looking for information, actually, to try to add to the evidence, to try to add evidence to this phenomenon so that we could understand its source. And I'm trying to find a page here, and I know it's here somewhere.
Okay.
Well, I'll start reading. Maybe I'll run across it as I read. This is from a great book by one of the great unheralded Planet X researchers named Greg Jenner, Jenner. And in his book, he studied the Colburn Bible, the ancient records of the last passage of the destruction that occurred during the last passage of Planet X around 36 and a half centuries ago. And there were some survivors, of course, not, and this passage was maybe not as devastating as other passages. So there were survivors who wrote about the destruction that occurred. So I'm going to pick it up from the book Planet X and the Colburn Bible Connection by Greg Jenner, starting on page 49. Title of the chapter is Exodus Triggered by the Destroyer. And he goes on to say what I have been saying, too, for a number of years. He and I are pretty much, we're not in contact at all. But we're saying pretty much the same things that I had stated that the Passover of the death angel in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, where God said that that all of his people, the Israelites, should stay indoors and put the blood marks, paint the blood of a sacrificial lamb on their doors. And when the destroyer, according to the exact passages in Exodus chapter 12, God told Moses that when the destroyer passes over, the destroyer would pass over the Israelites, meaning not destroy them, but destroy anyone who was outside, all the Egyptians, or many of the Egyptians. So this is the origin of the term Passover. And it's in April. That's when God established April as the first month of the Hebrew calendar. And that coincides with Passover, or the Easter season here. Well, anyway, that's just an interesting sidelight. The destroyer indeed passed over, and we have biblical evidence that it did, this huge celestial body. And when it did, it caused gravitational and magnetic molestation of Earth, which you would expect from bodies that are so large that they can exert an appreciable gravitational pull on Earth's surface and cause bring rocks and debris along with it, dragging it like a debris field, a huge debris field that it had picked up while it was traveling inbound to our solar system, coming from deep space. It would have picked up a great deal of all sizes of objects, asteroids, rocks, even iron oxide dust. And evidence of that, of course, is in the biblical description of the waters turning red in the book of Exodus.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is SETV.
The water became so red that the people, and it was so foul that the people could not drink it. They would vomit from drinking this polluted red water. And they were digging all over the countryside, trying to find underground supplies of water. Of course, without water, everybody's dead, so it was a feverish endeavor by the people of Egypt to try to find fresh water. But that's just one example. This object is so large that it pulls everything in with it in a gravitational field. And everything, particles even as small as iron oxide dust. And of course we know that it is red, and it has a red cloud around it because there have been sightings by there was one leaked sighting from the South Pole telescope way back in January of 2008. Somebody put it up on YouTube. This must have been one of the scientists from the South Pole, secret U.S. government building down there. There's a facility down there that has an infrared telescope that was constructed in the harshest environment on Earth on the South Pole, only because they had to view it from that particular far south location, because this planet, this brown dwarf star, comes in from below the Earth, and that's the only viewing location. That's the best viewing location. Well, anyway, somebody leaked it out, and it appeared like a red flame. You can probably see a picture of it right now. Some people have captured it, I think, before it was taken down. Well, anyway, so the iron oxide dust, but I'll go on to read some of this Colburn Bible, this ancient text that was found discovered by archaeologists I guess during the 1800s, and it's now passages from what's called the Ipuwer Papyrus. That's an ancient Egyptian scroll with the testimony of one or more Egyptian survivors as to what happened back then, 36 and a half centuries ago. I'll read from this Colburn Bible, Manuscript 6.1, quote, this is a Greg Jenner's book, Planet X and the Colburn Bible Connection. The dark days began with the last visitation of the destroyer, and they were foretold by strange omens in the skies. All men were silent and went about with pale faces. These were days of ominous calm, when the people waited for they knew not what. The presence of an unseen doom was felt. The hearts of men were stricken. Laughter was heard no more, and grief and wailing sounded throughout the land. Even the voices of children were stilled, and they did not play together, but stood silent. The days of stillness were followed by a time when so right after the days of stillness, they were followed by a time when the noise of trumpeting, and shrilling was heard in the heavens. In the heavens. And the people became as frightened beasts without a herdsman, as asses when lions prowl outside their fold. The people spoke of the God of the slaves, and that was the Egyptians speaking of the God of the Israelites. Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians back around 1650 BC, as recorded in the book of Exodus. So they're speaking about the God of the Bible. The people spoke of the God of the slaves, and reckless men said, quote, if we knew where this God were to be found, we would sacrifice to him. You see, incidentally, people begin to draw closer to God when there's frightening environment, when there's a frightening aura, and events of great fear are approaching. We know that when the horrible attack on the World Trade Center occurred, many people spoke of God in the media, whereas up to that time, there was a taboo on speaking about God. But because of the fear incurred by this great disaster of the 9/11 attacks, people began to speak about praying to God. So that's what everyone does when things get scary. Continuing on with this from the Egyptian survivor 36 and a half centuries ago. Quote, but the God of the slaves was not among them. He was not to be found within the swamplands or in the brick pits. You see, the Egyptian slaves, their job was to make bricks so that Pharaoh could build his empire. So the God was not to be found in the brick pits. His manifestation was in the heavens for all men to see. But they did not see with understanding. So evidently, incidentally, we'll probably see the same thing. This is telling us tomorrow's news today, because what happened then will happen again. If you look at it from a scientific point of view, when a large body comes in to our solar system, the same phenomena are going to occur. So we can look to the Colburn Bible, the ancient account, to determine what is about to happen in the near future.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is SETV.
So,
I was mesmerized. That's fascinating. Another thing that I was thinking while you were while you were reading that is back in those ancient times, and it's pretty arrogant to assume that we are the most technologically advanced civilization that's ever been on the earth, but we could very well be. And I would think that the ancient Egyptians and the ancient, I'm going to call them the Israelites, because that's the way I think of them, is the ancient Israelites and the ancient Egyptians. If they had heard a sound like the trumpet sound like this, I would imagine they would be highly spooked out, because they didn't have the internet, they didn't have the instant communications that we have. So if they heard it, they would have thought it would be all over the entire planet, wouldn't they?
Yes, I mean, certainly the sounds would have been in other civilizations besides just the Egyptian and the Israelites in Egypt. It would have been heard, and there are records of from the Central American Indians, the Mexicans, the Maya of, I believe, what is now Guatemala, the Incas of Peru, the Aztecs. They have legends, and maybe even written records, I don't know, but certainly legends that have been handed down where they describe great geological disasters occurring. So yes, it was worldwide, it was global, and even in China, Emperor Yazhu, the Emperor of China during that same time, around 1650 BC, and of course there was no contact at all between China and the people of the Middle East and Egypt. However, so we could see that these were all independent records of this great global disaster that occurred at the same time worldwide. So yes, it was the world. People around the world felt the pain and the affliction of this disaster. The Emperor Yazhu had stated in his imperial annals, and they have been, found, and they should be available. I mean, archaeologists have reported on them that during this time, the Earth actually paused in its rotation for several days. That was the magnitude of this gravitational force that was applied by this passing space body to planet Earth that caused the spinning top planet Earth to actually slow down, and then actually pause in its rotation for about 3 days. And during that time, Emperor Yazhu said that there was daylight for several days. Daylight, it never got dark. And it was great disasters. Their fields, the entire nation was flooded out. They had to dig canals just to drain the water out of the flooded lands.
Wow.
And incidentally, don't we see flooding today? We've seen it. I mean, if our memory were better than it usually is when you hear news events, we tend to forget the major news events, like who remembers the Joplin tornado anymore, but that was horrific. Well, there have been so many floods that I have recorded, videotaped from the Weather Channel. I just can't count them all.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is SETV.
Tremendous, epic floods in the United States, every state of the nation. I can recall Louisville, Kentucky, Nashville, Tennessee, Washington State, even California, Florida, Massachusetts, etc. So floods seem to be typical some of the early warning signs of this disaster is great flooding. And that's exactly what Zecharia Sitchin stated in his book, his landmark book, The 12th Planet. He stated that the ancient historians, the Babylonian and Ninevite historians, wrote that some of the first signs of that the destruction is coming from this incoming, what they called Nibiru. Some of the early signs would be massive flooding. So we're seeing all the signs. It's quite obvious. But continuing on here with the Colburn description, this is an Egyptian survivor, and of course it's translated into English now by the archaeologists and the scholars who found this text. And I believe this Ipuwer papyrus, Ipuwer, and a papyrus, of course, is the script, is the scroll material that they wrote on. Very durable material that they was derived, I believe, papyrus was derived from some kind of a leaf or a plant, much more durable than paper. Well, this Ipuwer papyrus was found, and that's how they got this information. It somehow got into the Colburn Bible. Colburn is a composite, I believe, of that Ipuwer testimony, as well as others, too. But anyway, let me continue on here. If we knew, people were saying, if we knew where this God were to be found, this is regarding ancient Egypt, we would sacrifice to him. But the God of the slaves, that's the Israelite slaves, God of the Bible, was not among them. He was not to be found within the swamplands or in the brick pits. His manifestation was in the heavens for all men to see, but they did not see with understanding. So what they saw were evidently, I mean, it's quite clear to me that they saw comets. They saw sights in the sky that were very unusual. And you'll go on to find out that the stars began to shift from their vantage point when things got really severe, because that indicated not that the stars were actually shifting, but that the Earth itself was beginning to wobble. So if you're standing on a wobbling observation platform, planet Earth, you're going to see the stars will appear to be rotating or swirling around. Could be a slow rotation if the Earth is wobbling slowly. An astronomer might look up one night and find that the stars are not where they're supposed to be, etc. And incidentally, as I go along, it reminds me that people have been noticing this. The Inuit Indians, the Eskimos in Alaska, and they live on an icy plain, where there's not much growing there. It's all ice and frigid waters and icy horizons. So somehow they live from the sea, I guess. That's how they get their food, from the walrus hunting and whale hunting, etc. And they are very tuned in to the position of the sun at certain times of the year, especially when you consider that it's dark most of the year way up north near the Arctic Circle, right?
Right.
Because of the tilt of the Earth. So during the winter time, there are only a few days of darkness. So they should very well be aware of what days the sun should appear during the winter time.
Right.
And they say that the sun is not in the right position. And the people in Greenland, who are also up close to the Arctic Circle, are stating, there's a report that I had gotten where they state, and you can find it on the internet too, that the sun appeared 3 days earlier, or so many days away from the exact date that it should have appeared during the winter. I think it was last year. Well, anyway, going on, we know that there's going to be a rotation of the Earth, a wobbling. But continuing on here, dust and smoke clouds darkened the sky and colored the waters upon which they fell with a bloody hue. So that indicates that this object passing by, and it's also this object's accompanying comets that it held gravitationally in its gravitational grip, these accompanying comets were buzzing past Earth, sort of like a squadron of drive-by shotgun blasts. And all this debris was passing close enough to Earth that, of course, Earth would draw these objects through its gravitational force field. Earth's own gravitational force field would suck these objects in. And, of course, we see that often with meteor showers. Whenever objects get close enough, they get drawn into Earth, and you see shooting stars come flaming to Earth due to the frictional acceleration of these objects through the air. Friction is created, heat is results, and the objects glow red hot, and that's what a shooting star is. Well, anyway, dust and smoke clouds darkened the sky and colored the waters upon which they fell with a bloody hue. So that would be the iron oxide dust from surrounding the incoming cloud around the celestial body being drawn in and sweeping the Earth, actually. And that's how the waters turn red. Plague was throughout the land. The river was bloody, and blood was everywhere. And parenthetically, Greg Jenner says, this is red ash mixed with water. The water was vile, and men's stomachs shrank from drinking it. Those who did drink from the river vomited it up, for it was polluted. The dust tore wounds in the skin of men and beasts. Now imagine, for dust to tear wounds in the skin of living beings, animals and men, there must have been tremendous winds, very high velocity winds picking up, sand, and there had a lot of sand in Egypt, and that would certainly scar and cut into the flesh of animals and people. So dust tore wounds in the skin of man and beast. In the glow, this thing is glowing now. In the glow of the destroyer, the earth was filled with redness. So there you go. There's a very clear testimony as to this red iron oxide dust cloud sweeping Earth, causing the entire atmosphere to be filled with red dust as they looked up and saw this glowing red object above them, which was bringing the dust in. And of course, this object would glow because it picks up plasma, electrified gases. Electrified gas from the heliosphere surrounding the outer bounds of surrounding the outer bounds of our solar system. It's a huge sphere of plasma that is pumped out by the sun's solar winds. And the plasma is sort of like distant waves on a distant shore that build up and cause maybe sand to build up, you might imagine that, on the shore as a result of waves coming in from the deep ocean. Well, that's sort of analogous to the waves of electrified gases, plasma, that is blown out by the sun that build up in the heliosphere. So when this object comes in from deep space and penetrates our solar system, it has to get through penetrates that outer bubble of plasma, and electrically sticky plasma engulfs the entire celestial body. Now this body therefore becomes charged and glowing with this electrical charged plasma, which it carries in with it. So not only did they get the red iron oxide dust that was gravitationally attracted to this planet X, this object, this brown dwarf star, not only did they get the gravitationally attracted dust that swept the Earth as it passed by, but they could see the glow of the plasma. And later on we can talk about how that plasma caused electrical discharges or zapping to Earth, which are described in the book of Exodus of the Bible,
right,
which is a parallel account of this, what I'm reading right here. Now, in the Bible, it talks about rocks, flaming rocks. They call it hail, but it was rock hail that came down mixed with fire, it said. So it's sort of like I don't know, when you see in the movies machine gun fire peppering the earth, peppering the ground, a trail of machine gun fire, it looks like there's flames trailing, embedded right in with the bullets penetrating the ground. And that's the kind of electrical fire that accompanied and that engulfed these falling pellets of hail, rock hail, that was being sucked in by Earth's gravitational force field. It was electrical discharge. Now, having been in electronics and studying electricity and magnetism and teaching physics throughout my career, I can tell you that what happens electrically when rocks that are pulled into Earth's gravitational field and begin to plunge toward Earth and accelerate toward Earth, those rocks actually create a low electrical resistance, like sort of a highly conductive path for that plasma that's engulfing this passing object. So this plasma from the passing space body finds a conductive path along each of the rocks that's being pulled down, because electric conductivity is improved when the rocks pass through the air. And charge is picked up just as water droplets would pick up an electric charge. Moisture is drawn up into clouds, and the moisture carries electric charge, and that's how clouds become electrostatically charged, and eventually that they discharge in the form of lightning. So these are all natural scientific effects. This flaming rocks that came down in Egypt. Okay, let's see now.
Just to interrupt you for a second, those of the audience that are watching the video stream, a few minutes ago we had the what I believe are the original South Pole images of Planet X coming in. You can see it surrounded by the various objects with it. And right now we have an article on the screen by the NASA Astrophysics Data System by Anna Ziski, and the author is Anna Ziski, and it's entitled Electrical Meteors. So that's exactly what you're talking about.
Right, that's right. Plasma engulfs these bodies, celestial objects, asteroids, meteors, rocks, all sizes of objects. Mm-hmm. They become engulfed with plasma, and that plasma discharges to the Earth. In fact, even in the Bible, nobody's ever, people who study the Bible really don't have a scientific background, so they don't connect a lot of things that are stated, and they look upon some of these biblical descriptions as being mythical, fanciful, or symbolic. But I know, and other scientists have shown that some of the biblical descriptions are actually describing scientific phenomena, such as King David, when God said that he was going to, and people say, well, why would God be so destructive? Well, I have to say, just if he is destructive, we better be concerned about that and be concerned about communing with God in order to avoid the destruction rather than wondering why. If someone is sentenced by a judge to some kind of punishment, mm-hmm. I would not be asking the judge, why are you being so mean? I would try to get some mercy from him, because that's how you protect yourself. That's how you can seek some kind of relief from the coming punishment.
Right.
Well, anyway, in this, God was going to destroy the people of Israel, the people of Judah, because they had been worshiping false gods and turned away from God for so long, and they were his chosen people. So and they were doing horrible things too, sacrificing to satanic entities, things like that. So anyway, David said he looked up and he saw the sword of the angel of God pointing down toward earth. That's what it says in the book of 1 Chronicles 23, I think, or 16. I'm not sure, but I could find it. He looked up and he saw the sword of God pointing to earth, and God said that it was a pestilence, and this sword was a discharge, electrical discharge of a comet. The comet came close, just as we're talking about, and you can scientifically explain it by realizing that the comet is saturated with plasma, electrical charge, and as it gets close to Earth, close enough, it discharges, just as your hand would discharge to a metal object as you walk across a carpet. Body picks up a lot of static charge and discharges it. And when you grab a hold of a large metal object that is a sort of a reservoir, a receptor for electrical charge, like your car door or the doorknob. And all of us have experienced that stinging, the electrical sting that occurs. Very painful, because the body actually builds up at least several hundred volts, possibly even 1,000 volts of electricity just by walking across a carpet picking up static charge. The voltage is very high, but of course the amount of current available is very low. It only lasts for a very short time during that discharge. So that's exactly what happens on a cosmic scale when you have large celestial bodies engulfed in electrical charge. They get close to Earth, which is a receptor, like a Earth ground, and they want to discharge as an electrostatic force field that actually exists between. It's invisible, but it's stated in all your physics textbook, that force field that exists electrostatically between a charged body and a lesser charged body like Earth. Mm-hmm. And when it gets close enough, the discharge occurs. It penetrates that insulation barrier of air between the passing body and Earth. So this sword of the angel of God actually discharged and killed thousands of people of the tribe of Judah. And if the body passes over, anybody who's underneath that plasmatic discharge is going to be incinerated.
Vaporized.
In fact, if you look, just take a look at arc welding. Arc welding is where you have a high voltage, and you put it close to some metal, and the metal is, of course, low electrical potential of zero, and metal is a good receptor for electrons. So if you get it close enough, you see this arcing effect, and it's so hot that it actually melts the metal. And that's how they bond metal to metal, is with arc welding. And the same on a cosmic scale. Take a look at the Grand Canyon. When you understand, just visualize what we're talking about here, you can see that the Grand Canyon was most likely formed by this discharging of celestial bodies coming by thousands of years ago, coming close to Earth, being drawn in by a huge brown dwarf star. And these might have been outlying bodies. Many, many comets and planet-sized bodies were drawn in and held in the gravitational grip of this brown dwarf star. So it's sort of like a drive-by shotgun blast on planet Earth. The discharging of the plasma from at least one of the major space bodies in this entourage, this gang of comets. One of the space bodies discharged to Earth and created a groove. It actually burnt a groove in planet Earth around where it created the Grand Canyon. And if this object is moving, whatever the path of this moving object is, during that discharge, that is the channel, that is the path and the contour of the channel that will be dug into the Earth. So there's really, I think, the most likely explanation for the creation of the Grand Canyon. Well, anyway, getting back to this is an amazing testimony. And as you recall now, remember, they mentioned the shrilling and the trumpeting sound. It was one of the early signs. So unfortunately, it seems like we're experiencing those same early signs right here today. We have of this world today, and we should continue to follow it and to see if this is really an authentic natural phenomenon. Okay, let's see. Reading on. Plague was throughout the land. The river was bloody, and blood was everywhere. This is the red ash mixed with water. The water was vile, and men's stomachs shrank from drinking. Those who did drink from the river vomited it up, for it was polluted. The dust tore wounds in the skin of man and beast. In the glow of the destroyer, the earth was filled with redness. Now get this, vermin bred. I guess that would be, vermin is sort of like, is it small creatures like mice and all kinds of...
I mean, rats, cockroaches, any type of bothersome creature.
Yeah, I think I looked up the definition. It's small, pestilent creatures, usually, carrying disease. Vermin bred and fill the air and face of the earth with loathsomeness. Wow. Fill the air and the face of the earth with loathsomeness. I wonder what that happened to, how they affected the air.
I would think it was back then in that area. I think their primary vermin was, if I'm not mistaken, locusts.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We're talking
for sure. There definitely
Africa. I believe the big crop destroyer there would be the black thick clouds of locusts in the skies.
I think you're right, Bill. I hadn't thought about that, but that certainly makes sense. Yeah, I mean, there you go. That's right in the Bible, in the book of Exodus. Now that I think about it, you can find that where the locusts came in huge clouds swarming, filling the entire skies, and they devoured everything green. There was nothing left, no leaves left or no grass. Everything was devoured by these swarms of locusts. Yeah, that's it. Vermin bred and fill the air with, and the face of the earth with loathsomeness. Right, the earth and the air. Wild beasts. Oh, this is another, oh boy. I hate to even talk about this stuff, but this is what they experienced 36 and a half centuries ago. Wild beasts afflicted with torments under the lashing sand and ashes. Oh, volcanic ash was coming down too. Hot cinders. Wild beasts afflicted with torments under the lashing sand from the winds, I guess, with sand from the windstorms, and ashes. These wild beasts came out of their lairs in the wastelands and cave places, and they stalked the abodes of men. So that's another thing to look forward to, is wild beasts going crazy and attacking men. All the tame beasts whimpered, and the land was filled with the cries of sheep and moans of cattle. Wow. Trees throughout the land were destroyed, and no herb or fruit was to be found. The face of the land was battered and devastated by a hail of stones. There you go. We talked about that. The face of the land was battered and devastated by a hail of stones, which smashed down all that stood in the path of the torrent. They swept down in hot showers. There you go, the flaming stones, electricity. Hot, they were hot from the friction of the passing, plummeting to earth, the air friction. The stones were heated, but also there was electrical plasma being conducted along with these falling, plummeting stones to the ground. So electricity ran alongside the ground. Incidentally, I'm just talking, giving my own commentary. As I recall from the book of Exodus, they said these stones of hail struck the ground with fire running along them, just like the machine gun fire that you see in the movies. They swept down all that stood in the path of the torrent. They swept down in hot showers, and strange glowing fire ran along the ground in their wake. That's exactly what we're just talking about. And
that would be an electrical discharge.
Glowing fire in the wake of the falling stones as it plummeted to the ground. Boy, oh boy.
We see that in the science fiction movies. That a Tesla coil will do that. You'll have your lightning bolts traveling along the ground.
Oh, okay. Right. I have heard of the Tesla coil. I have never seen an experiment with it.
Oh, you should build one. Those things are great. All you need is a couple of plates of glass, some aluminum foil, a neon sign transformer, and some wire that you wrap into a coil and put a nail at the top of the coil. Those things are great.
Yeah.
I love those things.
I have to read up on that.
Yeah, you need to build yourself a Tesla coil.
You know, Tesla, before we go any further, I have a book here in front of me. Hold on a second. The title is The Fantastic Inventions of Nikola Tesla. And you know who the author was?
Who?
Nikola Tesla. And in this book somewhere, I know somewhere, somebody told me, I bought the book, there is an account of Tesla or Marconi. Marconi was a contemporary and a colleague of Nikola Tesla. And what Marconi had done was what Adolf Hitler in the 1930s came to visit the Italian dictator Mussolini. They were both allies during the 1930s prior to the Second World War.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is SETV.
To impress the visiting dictator Hitler, his ships were parked, and the German ships were parked or anchored in the Bay of Naples in Italy during this visit of Hitler to Italy. And Marconi performed an experiment whereby, very much like Tesla, he actually disabled, at a distance, through the air somehow, disabled all the motors, all the electric motors on the German ships. Of course, it was only temporary. It was not a permanent destruction. He must have generated a huge magnetic field, electromagnetic field. And from what another person told me after, and I have to find this in the book, I'm pretty sure it's there, but Tesla had actually created some kind of device that would incinerate a flock of sheep miles away.
Wow, now that's a big Tesla coil.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm looking through the book here. I don't have time to find it. Maybe I'll find the passages during the break, or we could talk about it some other time. But there's some amazing diagrams and schematics of his inventions, Tesla's inventions, and even photographs in this book titled The Fantastic Inventions of Nikola Tesla. You can learn a lot about HARP just by reading this book.
Yeah,
that's how the government got their ideas from that man, whom they murdered. It really was a shame. That's what happens when you're a genius. The government takes your ideas and kills you.
Yeah, it happens all over the place. We're looking, for those of you watching the video stream, we're looking at a medium-sized Tesla coil that a guy built in his garage. I actually, last January when I first started the show, at the beginning of the show, I actually had a video of the world's largest Tesla coil. This thing, this guy made this thing, and it's got to be 150 feet tall, and he had aluminum ladders and whatnot in his yard, and this lightning coming off of this thing was hitting the aluminum ladders and shooting up into the sky. It's amazing. You need to look up the world's largest Tesla coil and watch the YouTube video. This thing is absolutely astounding, John.
Wow, that would be a great way to protect your house against invaders.
Just flip that baby on.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has a right to self-defense, right? If somebody is trying to break into their home, or get in illegally.
Yeah, put a giant
that's a
Tesla
great
coil
way
on
to
your
protect
roof.
your home, isn't it?
That's actually a good idea. If it doesn't hurt them, it'll scare the stuffing out of them. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, look what Tesla was able to do with an electromagnetic field or some kind of electrical energy.
Right.
Transmitted through the air. He was able to incinerate a flock of sheep miles away. Wow. So, just an idea on, again, everybody should think about self-defense.
Yeah.
Everybody has a right to self-defense, no matter what some authorities try to tell you.
Exactly.
It's obvious.
Exactly. That comes from a retired Marine, folks. You have a right to self-defense.
Right.
And
continuing on here. Yeah, I served 4 years and 7 months in the Marine Corps, and it was that kind of trodden down environment that motivated me to go to college and study to be a science teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I got electronics training in the Marine Corps, and that was the foundation of all my later experience in civilian life as I built upon that foundation. So it was a great, it was terrible while it lasted, and there were some good times too.
Yeah.
But the education that it stimulated, it gave me a foundation educationally, and it directed my career. Well, anyway, where were we? Wild beasts afflicted with torments under the lashing sand and ashes came out of their lairs in the wastelands and cave places and stalked the abodes of men. All the tame beasts whimpered, and the land was filled with the cries of sheep and moans of cattle. I think I'm going back too far here, but the face of the land was battered and devastated by a hail of stones which smashed down all that stood in the path of the torrent. They swept down in hot showers, and strange, flowing fire ran along the ground in their wake. And he goes on in the book, Greg Jenner's book, Planet X and the Colburn Bible Connection. He goes on to say, now this is where he's interrupting this ancient narration of the testimony of an Egyptian survivor by stating here, Allen and Delair, that's A-L-L-A-N, and Delair, D-E-L-A-I-R, the two authors, in their book titled When the Earth Nearly Died, Compelling Evidence of a Catastrophic World Change, 9,500 B.C. In this book by Allen and Delair, When the Earth Nearly Died, confirmed the Colburn's hail of stones, quote, above, by writing the following. This is from Allen and Delair's book. Jews call iron nekoshet. This literally means droppings of the serpent. This is a meaningless term until we recall that in Jewish tradition, the serpent was another name for Satan.
Yeah.
It must, right. So that's like a cultural term, Jewish term, that seems to pin down and corroborate the origin, the cause of that term. And it seemed to be brought about, or seemed to have originated with this iron coming down from the sky. He says, in Jewish traditions, the serpent was another name for Satan. It must furthermore be relevant that the ancient Greek word for iron was sideros. This, when combined with the obviously related Latin word for star, sidus, or sideris, as iron star, lends new meaning to the concept of a large, partially metalliferous body. Amazing. A large body with iron oxide dust. The singular theme common to all these ancient traditions concerns the fact that these falls of meteor-like gravel were inextricably part and parcel of a terrible cosmic visitation which almost destroyed Earth long ago. That's from the book by Allen and Delaire, When the Earth Nearly Died. And incidentally, in the title says around 9500 BC. Well, I think they're pretty close. We pretty much know from Planet X's orbital period, I think we pretty much know, that if we do the arithmetic, it was around 9000 BC, but 9500 BC is close enough. When you consider how far back that is, being off by several hundred years is not a great error at all.
That's a mere pittance.
And, even others like the Horizon Project, Brent Miller of the HorizonProject.com, states that his research and his group's research, he's among a group of scientists that have studied these Earth changes, including the prophecies associated with the Earth changes. They say it was around 9000 BC, too. And Mark Hazelwood, who wrote the landmark book Blindsided about Planet X, around 11 years ago, Mark Hazelwood wrote that book. He also stated that from his studies, most archaeologists believe that the sinking of Atlantis did indeed occur around 9000 BC. So we have a number of scholars all claiming or believing that it was around that time. And that lines up with the Planet X's what is believed to be a 36.5 century orbital period. It takes 36.5 centuries for this brown dwarf star, which is called Planet X today by the astronomers. It takes 36.5 centuries to go on its long, very long, stretched out elliptical orbit into our solar system, loop around the sun, and be gravitationally slingshotted, catapulted back out of our solar system, back into deep space, at which point it travels toward a far distant dead sun, what astronomers believe is Earth's dead twin sun. A twin sun, and it circulates around that twin sun and is catapulted back toward our solar system by that dead twin sun. And you can visualize it as a celestial tennis match. Our sun would be the tennis player in the near court. Our sun's distant dead sun would be the tennis player in the far court. And the ball that they're batting back and forth would be this brown dwarf star, Planet X.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is SETV.
And for those who sort of never heard of our sun's distant dead sun, most astronomers today believe that from their studies, they believe that most solar systems are indeed binary. They have two suns, bi meaning two. So our solar system, according to astronomers of today, our solar system is fairly natural or common in that they believe it has a dead sun, a distant sun, and that's why it's so billions of miles away, of course, so it has not been sighted, but you'll find the references to this dead sun in the encyclopedia of the New Science and Invention Encyclopedia, the 1987 edition, and that information in that encyclopedia was given by NASA to this encyclopedia at a time when NASA had not been fully suppressed, and they were allowed to put out this information about.
What was the name of the encyclopedia
and also
again?
Planet X as its object being batted back and forth.
What was the name of that encyclopedia?
It's the New Science. In fact, I have a photocopy of it. New Science and Invention magazine. New Science and Invention Encyclopedia, 1987 edition. And at that time, there was a science community, and NASA knew all about Planet X. It was a very hot topic, but it was suppressed, of course, kept from the public by the National Security Agency, because this was the greatest, most fearful secret that they could imagine. They wanted to keep the approach of this brown dwarf star secret, because if the public found out about it, there would be panic. It would upset the world's economy, and the power elite would lose control. You know, when the public gets panicky, that's when the elite lose their control through fear, because now the people begin to fear a different master other than the elite. So I'm looking for that photograph in here. Oh, here it is. Page 17 of Mark Hazelwood's book, his 2001 book titled Blindsided, Planet X Passes in 2003. Well, that was a mistake to try to set dates. But because the bus is late, very late, doesn't mean the bus doesn't exist. And it's not really, when you consider it on the time scale of 36 and a half centuries as its orbital period, 10 years or so early or late is not much of an error at all. But here we are, the encyclopedia diagram. And it shows, this is from the New Science and Invention magazine, it shows the Earth, the solar system as you would look at it from above, and it shows the Pioneer 10 spacecraft that was launched by the U.S. government back in the late 70s. Mm-hmm. And they sent this Pioneer 10 space probe out in the direction where their calculations showed that there was this 10th planet. And close enough to where the calculations pinpointed this unseen but gravitationally felt body, close enough to the point where they felt that it would create. They wanted to find out if this space probe, Pioneer 10, would be pulled off of its trajectory by the gravitational field of this unseen Planet X. And here you see a diagram of it in the New Science and Invention magazine. It shows the Pioneer 10 going way out into deep space, beyond the outer bounds of our solar system, toward this object, which is pictured right in the encyclopedia diagram, as labeled as the 10th planet, 4.7 billion miles away. And it also shows the dead star, Earth, our solar system's twin dead star, which is labeled as 50 billion miles away. And this is all information from NASA that was given at a time before NASA was muzzled by the National Security Agency. So there you go, more evidence. You can probably find
cool thing is, John?
of that picture on the internet.
We're looking at the picture on the internet right now. We're looking at the article that you're reading from.
And it might even be from Mark Hazelwood's book, Blindsided.
I'm not sure if it is. It is actually a photocopy of book excerpt name Space Probe, the New Science and Invention Encyclopedia, 1987, and it is in the public domain.
That's a really important piece of information. I'm glad we came across that in our conversation here.
Yeah, it's right here.
Because I hadn't thought about it until, as you talk, you begin to get ideas and remember things that you hadn't thought about. And that brought that idea to mind. That is valuable evidence, along with all the other news reports. Of course, I've read them before, and I'm sure you have those, because we talked about the New York Times, the landmark New York Times report from January 30th, 1983, the New York Times titled, "Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X." And then the other, 11 months later, when Planet X was discovered by the infrared astronomical satellite sent up by the U.S. government and a couple other nations on a joint project. They sent up the infrared astronomical satellite to orbit around the south pole of planet Earth, and thus it had a great view, unobstructed view, no atmosphere to affect it at all. And it had infrared eyes so it could detect this dark body, which emitted and does emit only infrared light until it gets close. Once it gets close to the sun, it begins to get electrically excited. That plasma begins to activate and begin to discharge, and that's when it starts to glow red, when it gets close enough to our sun. So we should, in the near future, I would think we should see a tiny little glowing dot in the sky that should get larger and larger with each passing day. But right now, or at that time anyway, way many years ago, and even right now, it still emits only infrared light. But anyway, it was discovered by the infrared astronomical satellite when it was launched in 1983. The satellite achieved its mission, and again, because NASA had not been suppressed by the National Security Agency at that time, in December 1983, the Washington Post, the second largest newspaper in the United States, published the excited discovery of this mystery body on the front page of the Washington Post, December 30th. I'm looking at the actual photocopy that I got from the library archives.
Okay, let me, for those of you that are visiting the site for the first time, we actually now have a John Dinardo page with all of these links and everything on it. This is from the, what'd you say, the Washington Post?
Yes, the front page, Washington Post, December 30th, 1983.
And what do they call that article?
Okay, the title is Mystery Heavenly Body Discovered, Possibly as Large as Jupiter, by Thomas O'Toole, Washington Post staff writer. Page 1. A heavenly body, possibly as large as the giant planet Jupiter, and possibly so close to Earth that it would be part of this solar system, has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion by an orbiting telescope aboard the U.S. Infrared Astronomical Satellite. So mysterious is the object that astronomers do not know if it is a planet, a giant comet, a nearby protostar, and a protostar would be like swirling celestial dust that gravitationally pulls in on itself and builds up like sort of like a snowball, rolling a snowball into a huge snowman.
Right.
That's what a protostar is, celestial dust building up. They think it might be not sure if it's a protostar that never got hot enough to become a star, or a distant galaxy so young, I'm quoting here, a distant galaxy so young that it is still in the process of forming its first stars, or a galaxy. See, they've got all these hypothetical guesses as to what this object might be. But they're saying, or it might be a galaxy so shrouded in dust that none of the light cast by its stars ever gets through. Quote, all I can tell you is that we don't know what it is. Dr. Jerry Neugebauer, Infrared Astronomical Satellite Chief Scientist for California's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Director of the Palomar Observatory for the California Institute of Technology, said in an interview. He said, all I can tell you is we don't know what it is. But of course he was lying, because they knew exactly what it was. They knew it was this unseen body that had been mathematically observed. It's hit for centuries, literally centuries, by astronomers. They had observed perturbations or a shifting, jogging out of the orbit, the orbit of Uranus and Neptune, the outer gas giant planets in our solar system. At one point, they had found that the planets jogged a bit out of their orbital path, and of course, there's no physical reason for it, nothing that follows. It defied all the laws of physics. So they knew immediately there could only be one reason for this, what they call perturbations or discrepancies in the revolution of these planets in their orbit, and that would be a large celestial body so great that it exerted a great gravitational pull on these planets at one point in Uranus and Neptune, at one point in their orbit. So ever since the early 1800s, they had been looking for this body that they mathematically knew was there by its gravitational perturbations of the outer planets. In fact, the search became very heated throughout the 1800s, and then around in 1900, astronomer Percival Lowell constructed the Lowell Observatory in Arizona, dedicated just to finding this Planet X. And
Really?
Percival Lowell was the one who coined the term Planet X around 1900. So it's a valid astronomical term. It's been used by NASA. NASA actually wrote an internal document, and James McCanney had referred to that. James McCanney referred to this internal document NASA document titled Search for Planet X. And I think you can find it too. Dr. Robert S. Harrington, the late Dr. Robert S. Harrington, was a great astronomer. He was the chief of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. And he had written this paper, The Search for Planet X, in conjunction with research done by NASA.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunskyMysteries.com.
This is SETV.
Well, anyway, this article, getting back to the Washington Post article where they actually discovered it, Dr. Jerry Neugebauer, IRAS chief scientist, actually did not tell the truth. I won't say he lied. I'll just say he did not tell the truth when he said, quote, all I can tell you is that we don't know what it is. Because in the New York Times article that heralded the launching of this infrared astronomical satellite, they stated clearly, all the scientists, including Dr. Harrington, stated that they were searching for Planet X, and they described the long 200-year search for this object which had been perturbing the revolutionary paths of these outer planets. So first they tell you when it's launched, we're searching for Planet X, and then 11 months later somebody told them to be quiet, not to release this information, because evidently they said, oh, now we don't know what it is. Now, continuing on here, in this Washington Post article, December 30th, which heralded the discovery of this huge mystery heavenly body, as they quoted, possibly as large as Jupiter, they say, the most fascinating explanation of this mystery body, which is so cold that it casts no light. Wait a minute. How could they say it's so cold that it casts no light when they just said they don't know what it is?
Interesting.
They said, so let's go back to what they said. They said, we don't know if it's a planet, a giant comet, a nearby protostar that never got hot enough, a distant galaxy. Well, a distant galaxy is not a cold body. A distant galaxy is like billions and billions of stars, all in one cluster. And, suns, each sun having its own solar system. So they don't know what it is, but now they say, oh, but we do know what it is. Boy, the lies are so amazing. I never even I didn't stumble across that realization until just now. I'm quoting again, the most fascinating explanation of this mystery body, which is so cold it casts no light and has never been seen by optical telescopes on Earth or in space, is that it is a giant gaseous planet as large as Jupiter and as close to Earth as 50 billion miles. While that may seem like a great distance, well, they're not telling the truth. It's not 50 billion miles. The distant dead star was 50 billion miles away. This object was stated in a New Science and Invention magazine, which you have right up in front of you, Bill,
Yep.
as being 4.7 billion miles away. And the distant dead sun, our sun's twin dead sun, is the one that's labeled as being 50 billion miles away. But here they're telling you, oh no, it's so close, it's as close as 50 billion miles. Well, that's another lie, because if they only knew that it was not 50 billion, but estimated to be 5 billion miles away at that time in 1983, then the public really would have been a bit more panicky. So that's why they changed the figure to 50 billion miles. But they do go on to say in this Washington Post report, while that, quote, while that may seem like a great distance in earthbound terms, it is a stone's throw in cosmological terms, so close in fact that it would be the nearest heavenly body to Earth beyond the outermost planet, Pluto. Quote, if it is really that close, it would be a part of our solar system, unquote, said Dr. James Houck of Cornell University's Center for Radiophysics. He says it's so close that it's a part of our solar system. So that's amazing.
And I actually have, to interrupt you just for a second,
Sure.
John.
In fact, I'd like to take just a 1-minute break, and if you would interrupt, I would welcome that.
That is fine. This is a Celine Entertainment Television breaking news event. There has been an earthquake in Baja, Mexico. It is approximately 4.7 to 5 on the Richter scale, and there is a wide area electrical blackout right now. I repeat, there has been an earthquake in Baja, and there is a widespread electrical outage right now. We will have more details as they become available. I know this because one of our producers lives in Baja, Mexico, and she has lost all of her power due to the earthquake that they had down there. Whether or not any of this is related to the solar storm that we are currently experiencing, that I'm sure you've heard about on the internet and on the news, is anybody's guess. As I'm sure you know, from a political standpoint, the electrical system on the West Coast is rather perilous, and the peninsula down there gets a lot of their electricity from California and from the electrical generation plants in the southern United States and Arizona, California, places like that. There are websites that you can go to that will give you the current power outage data, so you could actually go to one of these websites. We have the links around somewhere. I'm not sure where they are. But all you have to do is do a Google search for power outage maps, and they should be able to direct you where you want to go. So I thought that was a rather interesting little bit of news. We are, in fact, for those of you that are watching the video stream, we are looking at a copy of the Washington Post article by Thomas O'Toole. That would be Friday, December 3rd, 1983. And our guest, John Dinardo, he has been reading from this particular article. And I have it up here on the screen so that you can follow along. And I find it interesting to note that the New Science Encyclopedia, which apparently got their information directly from NASA, said the thing was 50 billion miles away. And then in the Washington Post article, which apparently is also from has information from NASA, including this Professor Houck, they say it's 50 trillion with a T miles away. So they've changed their story rather quickly. So one of these two articles is wrong. Which one it is, we don't know. But I think John is back with us now. I hear his phone creaking mysteriously in the background.
Hello?
Yes.
I'm sorry, was my voice coming through?
No.
Oh, okay.
That was fine. I heard your phone creaking, so I figured you were back.
Yeah, I was, okay, right. I was just talking to somebody in my family.
Ah.
I just got back. It's interesting, though. I'm glad you brought that point up about all the discrepancies in their what the reports from the authorities. You know, there's so many discrepancies. It's obvious that they're doing a poor job of covering this thing up.
Yep. In fact, right here I'm circling the diagram from NASA, right here in the New Science Encyclopedia, where it says 50 billion miles. Right there, clearly says 50 billion miles. Now, if we go over here to the Washington Post article, you see it says 50 trillion miles. And it doesn't say it just once. It says it multiple times. And at the beginning of the show, remember, we told you about vetting your information that you see on the Internet.
Bill?
Yes.
Excuse me, Bill. Wait a minute. The Washington Post article that I've got, do you have the actual photocopy of the article, or is it a transcript?
It may actually be a transcript, John.
Oh, okay. Somebody transcribed it wrong. I've got the actual article that I photocopied from the archives of the Washington Post, and I can email you that actual high-quality photocopy.
Yeah, if you can do that, I will put it on the website.
Okay. It's you could probably, I'll tell you where you get it. It's go to thelightofdayradioshow.com.
Okay.
thelightofdayradioshow.com. And at the top of the page, there's a big Planet X logo. Click on that Planet X logo. Now, the page, if your computer's pretty fast, it should load this Planet X page. In about 20 seconds. It's a huge page filled with audios. And if you scroll down, you'll see the various news articles that I posted, the actual newspaper photocopies that I posted there. And you'll see the U.S. News and World Report. You'll see the New York Times and the Washington Post articles, all on Planet X.
There we go. Washington Post article right here.
And that's the actual photocopy. And, yeah, it's 50 billion miles, and that's exactly what they stated in a New Science and Invention magazine, right? That diagram that you just saw.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. That's where the confusion comes in, because they say in the New Science and Invention magazine that our sun's distant twin sun, that dead sun, was 50 billion miles away, and that Planet X, which is basically like a tennis ball in mid-flight across the net, the cosmic net between outer deep space and our solar system, that Planet X was about 4.7 billion miles away, as the diagram labeled it. Say 5 billion miles away. Not 50 billion, but they exaggerated the distance in the Washington Post article, probably, again, because somebody was telling them, hey, you guys, you better not talk about this. You better start making it seem not as bad or not as close as it really is. And so they probably said, well, it's really 5 billion miles away, but let's say 50 billion miles.
Yeah,
why
this is all part of the vetting process that people have to do when they're researching this type of stuff.
The vetting is okay here. It's just that we're catching the authorities in a lot of lies. I mean, we're really vetting, authenticating this discovery with the major declarations from the powers that be, the NASA, the California's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, quoting the scientists there, and Cornell University's Center for Radiophysics on the front page of the Washington Post, and also the Planet X Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X article in the New York Times. All that stuff is very well vetted, and thank goodness what we're doing in these well-authenticated reports is finding lots of lies, distortions coming from the power elite in the government, the U.S. government. not the newspapers themselves. The newspapers are just reporting what they're told by the scientists at the top of our government.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunskyMysteries.com.
This is SETV.
Right.
So they're like President Nixon had said years ago when he was I guess when he was probably in the midst of the scandal where they were trying to destroy him, because he was, I guess, I think he was challenging the criminals in government who had perpetrated the assassination of President Kennedy and done a lot of other things, horrible crimes. And he was saying President Nixon had said it's not the crime that incriminates them, but it's their cover-up of the crime that incriminates them.
Right.
And we could see that same principle in operation here. The cover-up is clumsy, and it's easy to detect their lies. So when they lie this way, you have to say, why would they be lying? This is the greatest discovery in the history of the world, the greatest scientific discovery, greater than anything from Einstein or from Sir Isaac Newton, because this object will bring about the destruction of the human race.
Well, not only that, I think part of our problem here is that these guys, if they say, okay, yeah, this thing's coming, it's going to validate the so-called legend of Atlantis. It's going to validate parts of the Bible, the Colburn Bible, all of these different legends, and it's going to validate all of those when they want to be viewed as the people that have all the knowledge, and we are the greatest civilization ever to be on the planet. When in fact we may not be. There's no humbleness with these people at all. They're not humble at all.
They want to maintain their power, because when a government is all dominant, as this one is, so dominant over the lives of this entire nation and over the lives of people of other nations, such that they can perpetrate these wars, slaughter innocent civilians in other countries for absolutely no reason, to go into Iraq under the phony pretext that Iraq was responsible for the attack on the World Trade Center, when we know the evidence is mountainous. We know that it is indeed the people who control our government, the banksters at the very top, who are the ones who masterminded the attacks on the World Trade Center. We know that, and they use that. They perpetrated that attack in order to concoct a phony reason for going to war and for creating a dictatorship in the United States. It was obvious, so obvious. Their plan was very clumsy, and as I say, they've left so many clues and so much evidence that everyone who's studied it knows who really, the power elite who control this country, perpetrated that attack. Well, when a government gets that powerful, they want to maintain that power. But when a force greater than anything, greater than the highest echelons of power in governments, comes in the skies, something appears in the skies that can destroy the earth, and there's no weapon on earth that can stop it, then they are desperate to cover it up.
Well, they're going to, can't you pass some law or something like that? I mean, these people are they've dug everything in so deep financially that even if we wanted to send something up there to try to deflect the thing, we couldn't afford to do it now.
And you couldn't. No, I mean, there's nothing that man's greatest technological achievements are pitiful compared to it when given the task of trying to stop this object. No man, no civilization could ever do anything, not anything at all, to impede the approach of this brown dwarf star. This object, it's defined by the scientists. I'll even quote you from the New York Times report before NASA was muzzled by the National Security Agency. It says here, quote, this is from Dr. Robert S. Harrington and other astronomers. Quote, New York Times, January 30th, 1983, from the article titled, Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X. And I'm going to quote you this one paragraph. More credence was given to the hypothesis that a brown dwarf star accounts for this mysterious gravitational force. This is the informal name astronomers give to celestial bodies that were not massive enough for their thermonuclear furnaces to ignite. Perhaps like the huge planet Jupiter, they just missed being self-illuminating stars. End of quote. So this thing is considered to be, by the scientists back then in 1983, to be a brown dwarf star.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they called it mentioned it to perhaps like Jupiter, just missed being self-illuminating stars. And here we see 11 months later when this object was actually discovered by the infrared astronomical satellite, they say that it's possibly, here's the headline, Washington Post front page, December 30th, 1983, mystery heavenly body discovered, possibly as large as Jupiter. So, in fact, we know it's now with more scientific evidence coming in, people who have researched it. There's a lot of, we don't know because only the government has all the information with their high technology equipment and the best scientists in the world from using our taxpayer funds, that is. Only the government knows about the size of this, but there's a good information leaking out that this object is somewhat larger than Jupiter. And if it's a brown dwarf star, you can look up the definition of a brown dwarf star. Very conservatively, the smallest brown dwarf star is considered to be about 3 Jupiter masses. 3 Jupiter masses. Now, one Jupiter mass is 318 Earth masses. You can look that up. Jupiter has a mass equal to 318 Earths. So 3 Jupiter masses, which would be a puny brown dwarf star, would be close to 1,000 Earth masses. So the gravitational pull of this passing celestial body as it travels past Earth and past all the planets on its way to loop around the sun, the gravitational pull would be so enormous that it would certainly cause a molestation of the Earth's crust, a gravitational pulling of the Earth's crust, sort of like you would take the blanket off your bed, grab it with your fingers, and pull it upward. That's what would happen to the Earth's crust. And then just yank the blanket, yank it sideways so that it forms a series of ripples and rumples.
Right.
It becomes rumpled. That's what happened to Earth's surface thousands of years ago when this brown dwarf star came in on its periodic incursions into our solar system. It gravitationally grabbed Earth's crust and pulled it sideways and caused it to ripple. And when you look from an aerial view at the mountains that are formed, mountain ranges, they evidently were formed by this rumpling effect, this ripping effect on Earth's crust. Now, if you visualize a peach, take a very overly ripe peach, and let's imagine that the skin is so ripe that the skin on the peach is very loose, and you can wrap your hand around that peach and apply a rotational stretching force to the peach such that the skin will actually slip over the flesh, over the ripe flesh, and the skin of the peach will become wrinkled. Those are what happens on a cosmic scale. That's what happens to form mountains when the crust of Earth becomes wrinkled.
Right.
And, of course, the crust is kind of rigid, so it doesn't wrinkle real nicely like the skin of a peach would, but it cracks at the very ridge. It's like a pie crust that's damaged. You do get a formation of a wrinkle, causing the crust to jut upward, but it cracks in the process of its thrusting upward, and that's why you see these jagged peaks on mountain ranges, because it's split right where the most accentuated crease is in the wrinkle of Earth's crust.
Right.
It's all very logical when you look at this, when you observe the geology of Earth.
Now, let me ask you a question. My science producer, Boris Artemenko, and I were talking about this earlier today, and what you just said lines up with what he was saying, because there's a lot of people around that are saying that the core of the Earth is spinning faster than the outside of the Earth, and it's causing all these problems, when you and I and the people that are serious about this, that take what NASA told us way back then seriously, that this is an external body to us that's actually causing these problems and these effects. And these people, they're making all of these underground bunkers and everything, and they're simply not going to be safe in there, are they?
Well, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. The fact that they are building underground facilities, and Marshall Masters got a lot of his information from Philip Schneider, who was a high-level geologist. And I do want to get back to reading about the Colburn Bible again, the accounts of what happened in the past, and we will get back to that. But I just we're digressing in very good directions here, I think, bringing a lot of incidental information in that really belongs to the discussion.
Yeah, we're freewheeling tonight, folks. No script at all. We're just having a conversation here.
Right. Marshall Masters wrote, and actually Masters, Vanderwarp, and Manning wrote the book Planet X Forecast and Planet X Forecast and 2012 Survival Guide. And I've got to go through the survival section of this book. You'd be interested in this, Bill. There's a lot of good survival information here that we haven't touched upon. But on page 136 of this book, Planet X Forecast and 2012 Survival Guide, by Marshall Masters and two other authors. Page 136, I'm going to read this. Let's see. During his 1995 lectures, Philip Schneider told audiences that 13 attempts had already been made on his life. His ex-wife, Cynthia Dreyer, further adds that he continually told his friends and relatives that if he ever committed suicide, they would know he had been murdered. At face value, this paints a picture of a man who was finally silenced on the 14th attempt. Given the suspicious nature of his demise, his following statements on government black operations and underground and undersea bases arguably offer us a deathbed statement level of credibility. But real quickly, before I read his statement, the late Philip Schneider's statements, what a heroic man, man of great conscience.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunskymysteries.com.
This is SETV.
Trying to read his background. As a geologist and engineer, he had top government clearances. Consequently, he visited many foreign countries and briefed their government leaders during his 17-year tenure with the U.S. government. For 11 of those years, he worked at Groom Lake in the Nellis Air Force Base area of Nevada, north of Las Vegas. He co-invented charge blasting and rock deflagration technologies, and was the son of a former Nazi U-boat commander. After World War II, his father helped to build the Nautilus, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine. The maser-laser rock deflagration devices that Philip Schneider invented are used to create underground tunnels and complexes by melting and agatizing rock. Used in tunnel boring systems, they can bore a 28-foot wide by 28-foot tall shaft at a rate of 7 miles per day.
Wow.
To clear the tunnel of haulage that the device did not agatize, workers would bore vertical holes to one side of the lateral shaft and use hoists. This would reduce the chance of rock dust getting into the machinery or the laborers' lungs or masks. Wow. Okay, now getting back to this is what Philip Schneider
That would be
said
that.
before they murdered. Pardon me?
Have you seen the photos of that supposedly atomic-powered Air Force tunneling machine?
No, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's. I've seen pictures of it. It's got a bunch of Air Force people standing around it, and it's white and has the Air Force logo on it. And supposedly, it's a tunnel boring machine. But that would, what you just said, would kind of actually give some credence to that.
Right, and I mean, this is really important for people to know that the government has these underground cities, and not only in this country, but in Russia and in even the Vatican, I believe, has their underground city in the Italian Alps. And incidentally, too, I mean, I keep on getting off onto side issues, but these are important, too. And John Moore has reported that the Vatican Library, people ought to check this out, the Vatican Library has been moved. Now, you can find them references where they said, oh, there's some reason why we have to renovate the Vatican Library. But during that renovation period, it was an extended period of time, I believe they moved some of those priceless books out of the Vatican Library to a different location, a safer location, where they would not be destroyed by inundations, flooding, or any other disasters. The Vatican Library books, maybe the library is still there, but the contents have been moved. We ought to check into that, but that's a very secretive operation, and John Moore has spoken about that. Also, speaking of moving away from dangerous areas, the Central Intelligence Agency has moved to Denver. You can check that out. From Langley, Virginia, near the East Coast, the dangerous, tsunami-prone East Coast, all the way out to Denver, where you have the underground cities, under Cheyenne Mountain.
Yeah,
NORAD.
NASA moved a bunch of people out there, too, I think.
Oh, right. NASA, the CIA, and also the Environmental Protection Agency, government agencies moved out, and that tells you something.
Now, isn't that odd? Why would they do that?
And Houston, too. Houston is a flood-prone area, tsunami-prone area. And I think some of the NASA facilities are down there, or were down there. Mm-hmm. I think some of them have moved.
Wow.
And also, another thing, a facility, Plum Island off the coast of Connecticut, where the government, evidence is clear that they actually concocted Lyme disease, which is the great silent affliction of so many people now. It's a horrible epidemic created by your tax dollars and my tax dollars on Plum Island, this biological facility off the coast of Connecticut. I believe, and you could check on this, but I have read, I think I've read also articles that indicate that they're moving Plum Island facilities to the central U.S. They have already moved, but you can check that out on the internet and see if that's true. So you have all this evidence of high-level, valuable government facilities moving away from the East Coast, inland, far inland, to safe areas. That's a lot of proof right there. Now, getting back to Philip Schneider, you just heard his credentials, the fabulous credentials in the field of geology. his quote is that, according to Schneider, as of December 1995, this is, many years ago, there were 131 underground bases worldwide. 131. The subterranean variants are known in the black operations community as deep underground military bases, DUMBS, DUMS. The submarine versions, which exist beyond the continental shelf, are designated DUM-2 bases, the number 2. Schneider focused his lectures on the subterranean deep underground military bases and offered the following facts. U.S. subterranean locations, deep underground military bases, are typically located on government-owned land. For example, 9 deep underground military bases are situated under Nellis Air Force Base north of Las Vegas. Average size and cost, 4.5 cubic miles at a cost of $17 to $31 billion each. Largest base size and cost located in Sweden. It is 30 cubic miles at a cost of $2 trillion. Took 5 years to build and was wholly underwritten by the United Nations. And, of course, that's U.S. tax dollars.
Yeah.
Range of depths. The depths range from 500 feet for the older storage bases to just over 10,500 feet, and that's like 2 miles deep, for military installations. And it goes on and on. But anyway, so we have a lot of evidence in Marshall Masters' book, Planet X Forecast, 2012 and 2012 Survival Guide, containing the testimony of a high-level government geologist, Philip Schneider, who was a part of these construction. He was involved in the construction of these underground bases. Getting back to Ray Jenner's book, Planet X and the Colburn Bible Connection, we talked about, Allen and Dallaire talking about these in their book. Allen and Dallaire stating that there was, iron oxide particles being dragged in and sweeping the earth and polluting the water with red iron oxide contaminants. I'll go on to read here. The fish of the river died in the polluted waters. Worms, insects, and reptiles sprang up from the earth in huge numbers. Now, why would worms, insects, and reptiles, meaning frogs, spring up from the earth in huge numbers? Bill, maybe you can do a search on, let's see, you type in on Google, China earthquake toads, T-O-A-D-S. China earthquake toads, or toads China earthquake. You should get a photograph. You should come up with a photograph.
Yes, we did.
Swarms.
Yeah, we saw that. I think there they are again. There's the toad photographs. There's a toad right there.
Like swarms of toads, right? Coming up from the ground. And there you see these people in the city of China riding bicycles down the street with swarms of toads coming up from the ground, right? Is that the picture that you've got there?
Yep. That's the same one we had on the, I think it was either the last time or the time before that you were on. We were talking about the pressures under the earth sending the worms and the frogs and the toads and everything else up to the surface.
Right, the electrical discharge, what is called as the piezoelectric effect, where when crystals are impacted together, there's a concussion of crystal. What is generated is a high voltage. Mm-hmm. It's called a piezoelectric effect, and that's the same principle that's used for your cigarette lighters. When you hear the little snapping sound, it generates a spark because high voltage has been generated, and the voltage arcs electricity across a very thin gap, like a spark plug in the old cars that used to have spark plugs.
Right.
They have a tiny little gap, and a high voltage was generated, which would cause an electrical spark resulting from that high voltage to jump across that very thin gap. If the gap were too big, the spark would not occur. because the air in between the gap, that tiny gap, acts as an insulator. So if you narrow the gap, and we used to have to use a gap wire gauge to gap when clean and gap our spark plugs.
Yeah, feeler gauge.
Feeler gauge, right.
I used to be
and
a
you would have
real...
different wire thicknesses, gauges of different wires that you would run in between the gap so that you could bend the element, one of the electrodes, and adjust the width of that gap to so many thousandths of an inch so that it would spark properly for the given voltage that was applied to the spark plug. So what happens underground happens on a colossal scale. The same kind of arcing as occurs with a spark plug occurs underground when tectonic plates begin to shift. An earthquake is about to occur. It may not occur at that day, but prior to the earthquake occurring, there's a shifting, and you have huge, thousands of tons of rock plates clashing with one another. You can imagine the many thousands of volts of electricity due to the piezoelectric effect that would be generated across the gap of those clashing masses of crustal earth. And that electricity would really sting and zap the underground creatures, such as toads, and they come racing and swarming out of the ground to try to escape the pain of this electrical zapping and stinging that's occurring. The ground is fairly moist, so it conducts electricity, and they get electrocuted. So that's why frogs would swarm out of the ground. And this happened right before the China earthquake, days before it. People did not take the warning. They didn't understand. They just ignored it. But when you see, this is something that people need to remember and pass on to your friends and relatives and everyone you know. When you see worms, insects, toads swarming out of the ground, start warning people. There's going to be an earthquake. And then we have to learn what to do in case of an earthquake. There are things we could study to protect ourselves, like race out of the building if there's any sign of an earthquake. Various signs, there are various signs, such as colored lights in the sky, auroras. And I have the videotape of the great Chilean earthquake of January, was it January 2009?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was 2009, not 2010, but I have videotapes from CNN and Fox News on the day that, hours after that earthquake, and there was a woman in Chile stating, we saw colored lights in the sky just before the earthquake occurred. And the colored lights would be manifestation of the high voltage generated underground and causing a zapping, just like your spark plug would discharge electricity underground. But whenever electricity flows, especially at a very high rate and an instantaneous current of electricity is generated almost in an instant, it causes a very high, strong magnetic field to be pulsed, to bloom upward at the speed of light, actually, bloom upward out all around the source of that electrical current. So around the ground where the high tectonic discharge was occurring, prior to that earthquake, caused by the crunching and scraping of the tectonic plates, high current was generated, and resultingly there was a strong magnetic field that billowed out. This is a typical phenomenon. This is how electric motors operate. You have a wire, electrical current is run through a wire, and that electrical current wire is placed near a permanent magnet. So any electromagnetic field generated, electromagnetic field that blooms out concentrically like a tunnel surrounding the path of the current through the wire, that electromagnetic field interacts with the magnetic field from the permanent magnet, and the two fields, the electromagnetic field and the permanent magnetic field, sort of dance together. They push and pull one another in order to cause, and the net effect is you have rotation of an electrical motor. So this phenomenon is so common that millions and millions of electrical motors are manufactured based upon that principle of electromagnetic fields being radiated outward whenever there's electron flow or charge, a flow of electrical charge. It billows out where it's sort of like, imagine an airplane in the sky being analogous to the flow of a straight line travel of electricity. The path of the aircraft is like a flow of electricity. And the chemtrails that billow out around the aircraft are analogous to the electromagnetic field generated by that stream of electrons.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is SETV.
Well, this field is so strong underground that it billows out upward into the sky, and it ionizes some of the gases, some of the nitrogen in the atmosphere. And that ionization is the same same kind of phenomenon that we see with the aurora borealis, the northern lights, where the sky turns different colors, green and yellow and orange. It's because of magnetic fields. Electrical energy is creating a magnetic field. Electrons, too, themselves interacting with the Earth's magnetic field and ionizing the atmosphere. So if you see colored lights, that's a precursor warning sign of an earthquake, a possible earthquake. It may not always result in an earthquake, but be ready to flee your building. Or if you're in a building, the government says, and lots of so-called earthquake experts say, get underneath the table. But what if a big beam comes down and crashes that table, and you're underneath that table that collapses? Or they teach the children in schools to get underneath your desk. Well, that desk is not very strong. It can be crushed by falling beams, and the children will be crushed underneath the desks.
I think the reasoning is that if you go outside, then a tall building could fall down on top of you. But one of the things that I do to prepare for disasters, and I'm sure as a military veteran, you guys probably did the same thing, is I go over different scenarios in my head. Yeah, basically daydreaming about different scenarios. I've always thought that if I experience an earthquake, no matter where I am, if it's possible with all the shaking and everything and losing your balance and falling over, if it's possible, I'm going to get out into an open area, out either into the street or into a field or something like that, in order to avoid being crushed inside of a building.
That's right. I mean, if you saw signs like that, and if you work at a big building, it might be a good idea to stay home that day, because it's a lot easier to flee your house quicker.
Yes.
And you can get out of your house quicker when you see those warning signs. But in a big building, you may not make it out in time. You remember the earthquake in Japan? They had films of this. It's horrific to watch. The earthquake in Japan in March of 2011. And you see these people running out of their office buildings, and huge blocks of concrete plummeting to the ground all around them, smashing the concrete as these people ran out of the buildings. I mean, they would have been turned into hamburger meat by those falling masses. But that's what you would expect if you were in a large building. So if you see these signs, I guess precursor earthquake warning signs, you'd want to take the day off maybe, or for a couple days, take a couple days off and stay home and listen, watch for the signs, be ready to flee your house, look for the animals, watch the squirrels and the dogs. If you hear neighborhood dogs starting to bark, there's a strong clue right there. I mean, if they don't normally bark and you hear a lot of dogs barking at the same time, and you see squirrels getting hysterical, running around hysterically, animals, birds, etc., it's another warning sign. Jim Birkeland, the geologist, used to also follow the daily lost pet reports in the newspapers and sort of chart the number of lost pet reports. That's a wonderful way to predict an earthquake in advance. I mean, it's one of many. You don't use that alone as your criterion, but that along with other measures and other indications together can give you a strong indication of a coming earthquake. Lost pet reports, somebody should be charting those every day in their locale. And then animals acting crazy, barking, and in Italy, for example, I was watching the Weather Channel, and they did a documentary on earthquakes, and they were in Italy, and they were talking to these Italian farmers and herdsmen, ranchers, and these people said, these Italian farmers said, when our goats and animals, sheep, domestic animals start to get restless, that's a sign to us that there may be an earthquake. The animals can sense this. And even Art Bell reported right after the tsunami, the great tsunami in Asia, in Christmas of 2004 that wiped out so many people surrounding the Indian Ocean. He said not one animal or not one elephant was killed. And he quoted from the Washington Post because they all fled hours before the tsunami struck land. They could sense the vibrations in the earth. They have an ability to detect high-pitched sounds and vibrations. So just watch the animals. It's a great way to, and that along with colored lights in the sky. Lost pet reports, but you have to chart them every day or else you won't know what is an extraordinary number of lost pet reports unless you keep a daily record of them. And so on. Booms. Now I live in an area, I'm near the Ramapo Fault. The infamous Ramapo Fault, and I'm only about less than a mile away from it. And we've had occasions where there was booms, maybe over the past 10 years or so, at least a dozen or more booms. I mean, this is a long, loud boom. It sounded like a distant explosion. It's like a sonic boom.
Yeah, sort of like that that cracking sound in the Sky Trumpets audio clip that I played.
It was a little bit different. I know the Sky Trumpet's like a shrilling sound, right?
No,
but this was like
about 10 seconds into it, there's a cracking sound.
And you can't really tell because the audio pickup is so poor on the cell phones, you really can't tell the nature of that sound.
Well, this one was a little bit better than most. I think this one was with either a professional or a prosumer camera. Hold on a second. Let me see if we can hear that. Here it comes.
That was like a lightning, sound like a thunderclap.
Yeah.
In between that long, that's drawn out sound.
Right.
However, and yeah, that's certainly an ominous sound. I mean, it's some kind of a natural phenomenon. But what I was referring to was like the sonic boom. It sounds like a boom, and it lasts for several seconds. You've probably heard this jet. When a jet breaks the sound barrier, it creates a sonic boom.
I have
Very
witnessed
deep
that several
booming,
times.
sound like an explosion.
Yeah.
Well, that's an earthquake, like a minor adjustment in the Earth's crust. And do you know back around 2005. When was it when the whole northeast United States had a big power outage?
Yes, I still firmly believe that I caused that because it happened the instant I plugged a fan into the wall. I take full blame and responsibility for that. In fact, before you get into that, a little side note. People need to have a good evacuation plan. They need to have a good bug-out plan. Because when that happened, what I did is I hightailed it out of town and went to our bug-out cabin in northern Michigan. And I told the wife, I said, if the power doesn't come back on in a couple of days, you get the cats, you put them in the cat carriers, you load them up in your van, and you get up here with me. Because if the power is not going to come back on and it's going to be this entire area, then people are going to start to not be very nice to each other.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe you can go into some of the scenarios that you might expect. I mean,
gasoline. There's no power, there's no gasoline. If you got an empty tank of gas, you're sitting where you are. If the hordes of zombies start calling around looking for food, looking for something to power their cars, they're going to come knocking on your door.
And the most law-abiding, mild-mannered, polite person will become a brutal criminal when he's in need, desperate need.
Yep, 72 hours. That's the time frame before society breaks down. We saw it in Katrina. We saw it in Katrina. You know, that's the way it goes. 72 hours, and that's when the criminals finally figure out, number one, the cops aren't around. Number two, there's no phones for anybody to call the cops if we decide to start going rampaging. And that's exactly what they're going to do.
Right, and we have to be prepared. Bill and I were talking about, you and I were talking about protecting our homes from people breaking in. And there are bars you can put up there. There's plywood. And we should talk about that more in the future. Maybe not tonight because there's so many other things to discuss. But survival is part of it. This whole thing. It's something people don't want to talk about, but one can be quite grateful for their prior planning when the disasters do occur, and they will occur. I mean, I don't want to sound ominous, but look, we just had, as an example, of thousands of instances of power outages over the last 10 years. As one example, they just reported on the Weather Channel. I'm trying to remember the location. I think it was Oregon, where they had ice storms. Wherever, it doesn't matter where it is. You're going to have them wherever you are, where rain comes down very heavily and it freezes. You have this strange reaction, things that you never used to have years ago, where have heavy rains and instant freezing, and the trees become weighted down tremendously with ice, and then the trees begin to collapse on top of the power lines, and you have power outages. Now, in the warmer weather, you'll have power outages because the windstorms are documentably very severe, much more severe than we have known in recent decades.
Yeah.
Abnormal, bizarre windstorms, straight-line windstorms that get up to 90 and 100 and 105, 110 miles an hour. That's enough to blow the roof off of a house.
Yeah. Here in southeast Michigan, we get that's one of the types of storms we get is the straight-line winds. And I have noticed over the past, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, they're becoming more frequent. You're more likely to have a 60 or 70 mile an hour straight line wind during a thunderstorm than it used to be. I mean, they happen like all the time now, and frequently they're very quick bursts of very high wind, maybe 30 seconds long. But they can wreak a whole lot of damage. They can blow out windows and pick objects up throw your power out. And when they happen all over an area, a region like here in Michigan, I mean, you're talking 30, 40, 50,000 people without electricity. I went
right.
through.
I mean, the trees blow down onto the power lines.
Right, and the power lines themselves get blown down. I went through a period once. Oh, this had to have been 11 or 12 years ago, where I was without electricity for almost 7 weeks.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is SETV.
Wow, 7 weeks. So you got to really be prepared
You
for
got to
these
really,
long
really
power
be
outages.
prepared.
I mean, weeks and weeks. In the wintertime now, all your heating depends upon electricity. So you have to be prepared to heat the house in a different way.
You people better
There
have
are.
yourself a good propane space heater.
Right, propane. I have a natural gas heater. Puts out a lot of heat. I've got 2 of them actually.
That'll
You
work.
hook it up to your natural gas line. Now, of course, if you lose natural gas, there is a fitting. I think maybe you're the one who told me this. Just a matter of getting the right kind of fitting for the nozzle to accept propane gas. So I've got to get
Right.
propane tanks in case I lose natural gas. But I can use the same heater if I get the fittings. And I'm glad I remembered because I'm glad we talked about this because I completely forgot about getting those what you call a conversion nozzle for my natural gas heater to convert it to propane
Right.
if I need to.
Yeah, if you need to. And here's another tip for everybody. You need to get this stuff before you need it.
Yeah, right.
I had a boss once. He was he was the coolest guy in the world. He was like a father to all of us. And one day he was in a really bad mood, and he just walked up to us and said, "I want to know about any problems before they happen." And that's what you have to do with the survival stuff. You have to think about. I mean, in the wintertime, you had snow today. We had snow. Obviously, we're living in a wintertime climate. If the power goes out and it's out for 2 or 3 weeks, what are you going to do? If you don't have a fireplace, you're not going to. How are you going to heat your house? All the hotels aren't going to have electricity. I mean, what are you going to do? Go to a hotel? Go out of the area? What if it's like 50,000 people?
Yeah, I mean it's true. And again, the likelihood of these disasters, these power outages, is growing such that everybody can expect to be a victim of a long power outage coming very soon because the windstorms. I can tell you, I've been following the jet stream, watching it, and videotaping nothing but severe weather reports from the Weather Channel ever since 2004. Well, I stopped doing it around 2010 because I've got like 46-hour videotapes stored. I just can't do it anymore. I mean, it's just no longer relevant because the evidence is so mountainous. I don't need to get any more documentation. Well, anyway, the jet stream I've seen from studying the Weather Channel every single day, I've seen that the jet stream has become extraordinarily looped, rippling north and south. And I can get into detail later on when we have time, but I think it's related to the Earth's core. In the Earth's core, the outer core is molten iron, mostly molten iron and other metals. But within that molten iron core, according to the scientists who study this, they believe, nobody's been down there yet, but they believe that there is also a solid iron core, smaller, within the larger molten iron core. It's sort of like a ball floating around in a sphere full of liquid, if you can visualize that. That would be the Earth's core. And now because of the electromagnetic disturbances generated by the sun, the highly hyperactive sun, and that highly hyperactive sun is caused by these incoming space bodies exciting the sun electrically. Well, the sun's been blasting out solar flares, coronal mass ejections that have been impacting Earth's magnetic field. And when you disturb an electromagnetic field by the electrical phenomenon from the sun, for example, that disturbance feeds back through the invisible geomagnetic field surrounding the Earth like an invisible balloon, so to speak. And it feeds back to the Earth's core. The Earth's core is the source of this geomagnetic field that surrounds the Earth, sort of like the skin of an apple would surround an apple, and the core of the apple would be the source of the magnetic field.
It's made out of iron, right?
In a visual way. Pardon me?
It's made out of iron, isn't it?
Yeah, molten iron, magnetite, and then when the iron molecules are all lined up in the same direction, and that's what is known as magnetism. A solid iron magnet becomes magnetized when the iron molecules line up in the same direction such that the electron spin within each iron atom is all in alignment, sort of like soldiers marching together in formation. That electron spin of all the iron atoms is in the same direction. The electron spinning in those microscopic atoms generates the magnetic field. And again, we see that's caused, that's the root of that phenomenon of a magnetic field is the motion of electrons spinning around the nucleus of an iron atom. Isn't that amazing? So the electrons don't have to be in a long stream, in a flowing stream like with the airplane with the billowing out chemtrails to create a magnetic field, but they can just be in the atoms within an iron magnet, all spinning in the same direction, causing an additive magnetic effect, so that the magnetic fields do not cancel one another out as within a disorganized piece of iron, but instead of canceling one another out, like imagine a bunch of soldiers staggering around in all different directions. Well, there would be no coherent force in that group of soldiers, but if you take a group of disciplined soldiers marching in formation, the sound of their boots striking the pavement at the same time makes a very distinct, deafening, powerful sound. And that would be analogous to the electrons revolving around each atom in the iron molecule, the iron atom, and creating a compounded force of electromagnetism. Well, that's what happens in the Earth's core also. You have electrons, even more, I would say even in a more dramatic way, the molten iron and other magnetic metals in this molten iron core surrounding the solid iron nugget in the center. This flowing circular motion of iron molecules creates the same kind of magnetic effect that we talked about before when you have a flow of electrons or a flow of any electrical charge. There is a magnetic field that billows out, just like an airplane would be analogous to the flowing charge, and the chemtrails surrounding the airplane's flight path would represent the magnetic field that results, that is a consequence of that stream, that plane flight in flight. So you have the molecules of iron swirling around inside the iron core, inside the core of the Earth, in a molten form, generating a magnetic field that billows out and takes the shape of an apple skin. That this apple skin emanates from the core, and from both the top and the bottom of the core, and it wraps around the apple. And you can even see streaks, lines through many apples, vertical lines that seem to be similar to the invisible magnetic lines of force that are generated around the Earth. So when the sun blasts out its electrical particles, they clash with the Earth's magnetic field, distort the Earth's magnetic field, and this energy is fed back magnetically to the Earth's core, causing disorganization of the flow of the iron, molten iron within the core. Now the molten iron becomes disorganized, and even that solid iron nugget in the center of the Earth that scientists theorize about, that iron nugget begins to shift away from the very center of the Earth and moves off-center. And now that iron nugget really is a source, the root core source of the Earth's magnetic field. And when that source of the field shifts off-center, then the entire magnetic field of the Earth begins to shift. And the sloshing, irregular, disorganized movement that's caused by the magnetic field impinging on the sun's blasting, impinging on the Earth's magnetic field, now the flowing metal inside the Earth's core becomes disorganized along with the core itself becoming off-center, and you wind up with a jet stream that is no longer horizontal, going from east to west, a jet stream that is no longer, as it was decades ago, sort of seems to approximate the shape of the U.S.-Canadian border, rather horizontal and smooth and, innocuous. That's why we had nice weather back then, because the jet stream was smooth and horizontal, and it didn't ripple very much.
Right. We're looking at the same animation, well, not the same animation, the updated animation that we were looking at on last week's show with the jet stream, and it just looks bizarre. It's dipping down into almost into Mexico, and then it's streaming back up over the upper Midwest, and it just doesn't look like it used to. Now, I think it's also important to point out that a lot of these effects are caused by this incoming body rather than by internal Earth effects or man-made effects. Isn't that correct?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, because the sun has become very hyperactive, and the solar blasting, the solar hyperactivity has contributed quite a bit to the energy that's been implanted or directed into the Earth's magnetic field, which fed back to the core, causing the core to become erratic in its swirling motion, and causing this jet stream then to become wavy rather than horizontal. And it's the wavy W-shaped jet stream that's the cause of all this violent weather. But yeah, how did the sun get to a point where it became so hyperactive? It's because you have electrified, plasma drenched incoming bodies approaching from deep space, penetrating the plasma sphere surrounding the solar system, which is called the heliosphere. Mm-hmm. And as they penetrate this plasma sphere surrounding our solar system, these incoming intruding bodies become drenched in plasma, sort of like a bee flying into a big bubblegum bubble. The bee would become engulfed with bubblegum and pull a whole stream of bubblegum along with it as it flew into the bubble. And likewise, these incoming comets pull a whole stream of plasma, electrified gases, a whole tail along with it. And that's what the comet's tail is. And the comet tail begins to whip vertically up and down like a dragon, like the dragon that you see and depicted in the Chinese dragon dance every Chinese New Year's.
Right.
That's a character, or that's a choreographic representation of a legend passed down by many generations in China, describing what their ancestors saw in the sky thousands of years ago, the comet coming in. And as it came in close, that trail of electrical particles electrified plasma that it pulled in began to ripple up and down like a roller coaster. They call it a serpent. In the Bible, it's called a serpent.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
From beautiful Saline in southeastern Michigan.
Around the world at sunsky.mysteries.com.
This is SETV.
And
I have a question.
Quetzalcoatl, the plume serpent, is a name given by the Mexicans of ancient times. So all the civilizations saw this object in the sky. It's been written about by ancient historians. Pliny the Elder of the 1st century, I believe, a Roman historian, wrote what he had gotten from his ancient historical records, that ancient civilizations saw it as a red, glowing, blood red comet that twisted like a coil, and that suggests the rippling serpentine comet tail that was described by Chinese civilizations and the Central American Indians, the Mayans,
Now,
Mexicans.
A regular comet wouldn't do that. A regular comet would have a straight tail going out behind it. It wouldn't be a serpentine tail, and it certainly wouldn't be a blood red serpentine tail.
Right. Comets typically have a tail that flows out away from the sun as they go. Comets are pulled in toward the sun, and their tails are straight out opposite to the direction of the sun, away from the sun.
I have another question too. Do you think, and I'm sure you've seen this, I think Sheldon has been monitoring this. That'd be Sheldon Day. He's been on the show before. That we're seeing an awful lot of sun impacting comets right now, and they're all coming from below the ecliptic plane. And,
oh, really?
Yeah.
They're from below the ecliptic, huh?
Yeah.
So they're hitting the southern hemisphere of the sun.
Right. I'm wondering how many comet impacts, and I don't know if you're qualified to answer this, but I'm going to ask you anyways. I'm going to ask Boris when he's on in a couple weeks too. How many, what volume of comet impacts would it take to actually have an effect on the sun? Or does it just shake it off? Because remember, we saw that
every impact has an effect on the sun. If it's a comet, of course, a comet is defined by an object of a certain size, and as James McCanney correctly says, the comets are not dirty snowballs. They're actually solid celestial bodies that become electrically drenched in plasma, and that's why they have a glowing effect and a tail. But when they hit the sun, they cause every single comet that hits the sun causes some kind of electrical reaction from the sun, because the sun is highly magnetic, highly electrified and highly magnetic. And of course, as you've been hearing here, that electricity and magnetism is actually the title of a sub-discipline of the field of physics.
right.
It's called electricity and magnetism. So you can see how electricity and magnetism are so intimately related. One interacts with the other. One causes the other.
Right.
So when these comets hit the sun, these plasma electrically drenched comets strike the sun, they cause an electrical reaction, which is often magnetic. And the sun then spews out solar winds, high-intensity solar winds, which are electric gas particles, and protons and electrons, actually positive and electrically charged particles, but they also spew out electromagnetic energy, not just particles, but light. I mean, light is one wavelength or one band in the electromagnetic spectrum, visible light, that is. Well, X-rays are another higher frequency band in the same spectrum, the same, overall spectrum of electromagnetic energy. So X-rays are spewed out along with visible light. And gamma rays are an even higher frequency portion of the same electromagnetic spectrum. So gamma rays are thrown out by the sun, along with these electrified particles.
Yeah,
and those are all affecting Earth in a terrible way.
We had our guest on Thursday. He's a physicist, and he had it must have been a 40 slide PowerPoint presentation where he took us through all of the different aspects of physics. And after listening to him for a couple of hours and looking at the PowerPoint slides during that presentation, I actually understand what you're talking about. It's been it was a good refresher course.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to get that basic physics. Everybody can understand it, from a visual viewpoint without having to go through all the mathematics that's involved in physics. We don't really need that to understand the principles of electricity and magnetism that are in effect here, that are bringing about this ongoing and increasing destruction of Earth and the other planets in the solar system. We need to understand this phenomenon. When a comet comes in, it hits the sun, causes the sun to blast out electrical and magnetic disturbances, which impact all the planets, Earth included. The comet tail, well, I won't get too much into comet tail, but it does whip at times, I believe. The Chinese did see it whipping, and the ancient historian Pliny the Elder recorded from his ancient historical records that this serpent, this comet, huge comet was blood red and twisted like a coil. And that's because the tail of it becomes increasingly more attracted by the primarily negative sun and by the sun's magnetic field. So this tail, which would be straight at further distances out in our solar system, the glowing plasmatic tail becomes rippled as it begins to accelerate toward the nucleus of the comet. And it's sort of like an elastic band. If you were to stretch a rubber band far out and then release it, and take a slow motion film of that released elastic band, you would see it rippling. And that's how the tail of the comet ripples in the same way. It's electrically elastic, but very much analogous to the physical elastic band. Anyway, so that's what you can expect to see in the sky, these comets. And in the Bible tells us that we will see signs and wonders in the sky. Getting back to this Colburn, Planet X and the Colburn Bible connection. Let's see, fish of the river died in the polluted waters. Worms, insects, and reptiles sprang up from the earth in huge numbers, and we talked about that happening in China, with the toads swarming out of the ground prior to an earthquake. Great gusts of wind brought swarms of locusts which covered the sky. Yeah, you were talking about that, Bill. Yeah. So it was the winds that brought the locusts in as the destroyer flung itself through the heavens. So they're talking about this huge comet that we're talking about all night here. As the destroyer flung itself through the heavens, it blew great gusts of cinders across the face of the land. So it's saying here that this witness from 36 and a half centuries ago in Egypt is saying that it was this incoming object that blew the cinders across the face of the land. Now, we could speculate that the cinders would have been caused by volcanic eruptions on Earth, blackening the skies, and that indeed happened. But he's saying, in addition to that, you actually had cinders, gusts of cinders being blown across the face of the land. So I think he's talking about something coming from the skies, this cinder pollution.
Well, they burned wood back then, wood and dung, I believe, for fuel. So what would their view of a cinder be? Would it be dusty? Would it be fluffy? Little rocky things?
It doesn't say, it just says cinders, but maybe we'll go on to describe it in more detail here. I don't know if they're glowing cinders or just black dust particles. But it said this object blew them across, gusts of cinders across the face of the land. And it goes on to say, the gloom of a long night spread a dark mantle of blackness, which extinguished every ray of light. Imagine that. I wonder if it's probably talking about the cinders itself. The gloom of a long night spread a dark mantle of blackness. So I guess it lasted for more than one night. It lasted for days. Yeah, it created like a nuclear winter, a dark mantle of blackness which extinguished every ray of light. None knew when it was day and when it was night, for the sun cast no shadow. Well, that's exactly what Jesus tells us in the Bible. He predicts that this will happen, that the sun will turn black as sackcloth and hair. Well, or it could be when you look at the sun just goes black because it's being obstructed by a big shroud of black ash blanketing the sky.
We've seen that on some of those really strange cloudy days when it's the air is real dusty. The sun it doesn't look like a white disk. It looks more like a black disk.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I've noticed that before. I mean, there's times when I can't describe the cloud pattern. It's not a broken cloud pattern, but it's like upper clouds mixed with lower clouds.
Well, I mean, that's pretty ominous. I mean, to think of these clouds blanketing the sky. And I recall other records from this particular testimony where they state that this ash cloud covered the sky, but yet above the ash cloud you could see flashes of fire, lightning, I guess, because, there is electricity in the sky. Lots of electric particles build up, just like in the dust, just like a cloud builds up electrical particles during a storm, and that's eventually discharges to Earth as a lightning bolt. Well, these particles of dust also pick up electric charge, and even though they blanket and darken the sky, these particles, they eventually discharge when the charge gets so great, so you have fire flashing across the top of this blanket of dust. It's extremely scary. The darkness none knew when it was day and when it was night, for the sun cast no shadow. The darkness was not the clean blackness of night. Okay, we get a little bit more insight into what phenomenon this is. The darkness was not the clean blackness of night, but a thick darkness in which the breath of men was stopped in their throats. So you had a dust cloud, so you couldn't even breathe. And that was the black dust that blanketed the sky for days. Men gasped in a hot cloud of vapor. Oh, vapor, wow, smoke. Men gasped in a hot cloud of vapor which enveloped all the land and snuffed out all lamps and fires. Okay, so not more rather than dust, it appears it was a smoke cloud, and there was a deficiency of oxygen, and that's what snuffed out all lamps and fires.
Wow.
That's why you couldn't light it. That's why I know in the wind, I was wondering why the fires could not stay lit. Well, you had the high winds, but you also had this gaseous cloud that suffocated all the fires.
That must have killed a lot of people.
Oxygen.
That must have killed a lot of people.
Yeah, men gasped in a hot cloud of vapor. Wow. Men were benumbed and lay moaning in their beds. None spoke to another or took food, for they were overwhelmed with despair. Ships were sucked away from their moorings and destroyed in great whirlpools. Wow, whirlpools, wow. Can you imagine what kind of geological phenomena will cause whirlpools? It was a time of undoing. The earth turned over, parenthetically, during the pole shift.
Yeah.
The earth turned over as clay spun upon a potter's wheel.
Wow.
The whole land was filled with uproar from the thunder of the destroyer overhead and the cry of the people. So it was just like a loud noise of thundering destroyer overhead and the people screaming. There as the sound of moaning and lamentation on every side. The earth spewed up its dead. Corpses were cast up out of their resting places. I guess the earth's crust was so manipulated and molested by this gravitational force that objects were thrown out from buried objects were cast out.
Liquefaction.
Corpses were cast out of their resting places, and the embalmed were revealed to the sight of men. The embalmed were revealed to the sight of men. Pregnant women miscarried, and the seed of men was stopped. On the great night of the destroyer's wrath, when its terror was at its height, there was a hail of rocks, and the earth heaved as pain rent her bowels. Gates, columns, and walls were consumed by fire, and the statues of gods were overthrown and broken. People fled outside their dwellings in fear and were slain by the hail. Those who took shelter from the hail were swallowed when the earth split open. The land writhed under the wrath of the destroyer and groaned with the agony of Egypt. It shook itself, and the temples and palaces of the nobles were thrown down from their foundations. The highborn ones perished in the midst of the ruins, and all the strength of the land was stricken. Even the great one, the firstborn of Pharaoh, died with the highborn in the midst of the terror and falling stones. The children of princes were cast out into the streets, and those who were not cast out died within their abodes. There were 9 days of darkness and upheaval, while a tempest raged such as never had been known before. When it passed away, brother buried brother throughout the land. Men rose up against those in authority and fled from the cities to dwell in tents in the outlands. The slaves spared by the destroyer, that would be the Israelites who were spared,
Yeah.
they left the accursed land forthwith. Their multitude moved. This is Moses leading the Israelite slaves out of Egypt. Their multitude moved in the gloom of a half-dawn under a mantle of fine, swirling, gray ash, leaving the burnt fields and shattered cities behind them. Many Egyptians attached themselves to the host. Many Egyptians figured, let's go with these fleeing Israelites. They seem to be protected from all this. Many Egyptians attached themselves to the host, for one who was great led them forth, a prince of the inner courtyard. And parenthetically, this was Moses, the one who led the Israelites out of Egypt. So they followed Moses because he seemed to have connections with the High One, the power on high. Fire mounted up on high, and its burning left with the enemies of Egypt. It rose up from the ground as a fountain and hung as a curtain in the sky.
Wow.
Fire mounted up on high in the skies, I guess, and its burning left with the enemies of Egypt. It rose up from the ground as a fountain and hung as a curtain in the sky. In 7 days, by Remwar, Remwar must be this witness, by Remwar, the accursed ones journeyed to the waters. These were the slaves. The accursed ones journeyed to the waters. That would be the Red Sea. They crossed the heaving wilderness while the hills melted around them. Above, the skies were torn with lightning. They were sped by terror, but their feet became entangled in the land, and the wilderness shut them in. They knew not the way, for no sign was constant before them. Pharaoh had gathered his army and followed the slaves. This is all in the book of Exodus.
Right.
After he departed, there were riots and disorders behind him, for the cities were plundered. The laws were cast out of the judgment halls and trampled underfoot in the streets. The storehouses and granaries were burst open and robbed. Roads were flooded, and none could pass along them. People lay dead on every side. The palace was split, and the princes and officials fled, so that none was left with authority to command. The lists of numbers were destroyed. Public places were overthrown, and households became confused and unknown. I could go on and on with this, but
wow, that's just.
I think we need some relief from this horror.
That's just spooky. I think in the 15 minutes we have left for the show, we should talk about something good.
Yeah, I think there's a spirit of God that has been very good to us for all of our lives, for many, many generations. Just think of all the beautiful sunny days we've had, and the rain when needed to bring the flowers to life and bring the grass to flourish, and the trees to bring flowers and buds and shade for us in the summertime. All the days and weeks and months and years of blessing we've had from the heavens, mild weather, beneficial weather, minimal of storms.
Yeah.
And now, there's a power behind all this, good weather, good events and bad events. And the Bible tells us throughout it, we can't ignore it, because if we ignore, even if we refuse, some people are indignant about exploring the warnings in the Bible, they could be committing suicide by shunning those warnings, and by shunning the escape and the relief that is offered in the Bible.
We're talking about the sheeple.
By turning our minds to God, and it seems like such an unnecessary, such a foolish effort, just to can a thought in a person's mind affect their survival? I mean, here we're talking about survival from natural disasters. Can simply thinking your thoughts to God or listening for God in your mind, can that make a difference? Well, most people would not see any benefit in calling to God in their minds, but that's what I try to do all through the day. I try to keep my mind attuned to God and think my thoughts and listen for God's thoughts and see this invisible spirit that keeps our bodies humming and alive. See this invisible spirit as our best friend. And that's what I try to do. I never used to do that as a science-minded person throughout my life, but I think there is an inexplicable calling that we get from God, especially when there's fear in the air.
And especially when we know this fear is coming, we've had plenty of warnings that something is going on, something unusual, and we believe that it is this incoming celestial body on a 3,600-year orbit, and I would think that a significant part of our survival is going to be spiritually as well as physically. I mean, having all the food in the world is not going to do you any good if you're one of the damned.
If it gets to the point where they were describing in these records of ancient Egypt, if it gets to that point, food won't do anyone any good. You won't be able to breathe the air.
Yeah.
For one thing, and then, just so, but, if these, I found through study and research, and other people have found through deep study and research, that the prophecies of the Bible were actually given to the prophets of the Bible by a supernatural power, because even though it's difficult to scientifically explain how that could happen, how men could get words and thoughts delivered to them by a supernatural power and be told to write these things down. Nevertheless, we see the prophecies of the Bible coming to pass thousands of years after they were made. So in the book of Revelation, the Lord Jesus in heaven spoke to John. And John says, this was the Lord Jesus speaking to my mind. He saw these visions of the end, and what he saw was, we can go on, but so many of these events are characteristic of the geological disasters that we're describing, as well as the political world government, one world government that we see forming right now. That's all described in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, and other places. And it even goes to such detail as to prophesy. And again, John the Apostle got this vision from the Lord Jesus in heaven. They told him that this would happen at the end, toward the end, way, way into the future. And it described a mark that's in the right hand. Not just any hand, but in the right hand or in the forehead of everyone. And only with that mark could a person buy or sell. There would be a cashless society. And we sort of seemed to see our global dictatorship moving in that direction. And we do see a global dictatorship. That's quite evident.
Yeah.
So the prophecies are supernatural, but nonetheless, they're coming from a power, and they're valid. This power actually exists. And this supernatural power tells us that you can be saved if you just call out in your mind, just in your mind, to that supernatural power.
That's, I have to say, that's true.
And what other choice do we have? Suppose a skeptic would say, I don't believe that. Okay, then you've chosen to die, because you know these disasters are coming. I would say to that skeptic, do you have a better plan? Let me know about it. What's your plan?
Yeah.
How do you stop this thing from this incoming dwarf star from wreaking destruction on all of us?
You know, I had a conversation with somebody just this past week. And my point is, pin them down. When they tell you that they don't, I don't believe in God, everything will be fine. Pin them down. Why? Ask them why. Ask them what their plan is.
That's so true, and years ago when we were teenagers, and I was a skeptic myself at the time, but I had a friend who was a believer, and we just ridiculed him. But he would say, look, there must be a God. Look, everything is so orderly and so beautiful and magnificent. The design is so clear and just so complex and perfect of biological life, including human beings, and the way the planets revolve around the sun, and we have 4 seasons, and our Earth is just the right distance away from the sun so that we have a livable climate. And he went on to describe all these wonderful phenomenon and facts of life, including the miracle of the human body and eyesight, how complex and how beautiful the human eye itself and operates, and how you could see a high definition, with perfect eyesight. Of course, this is not a perfect world, and there is degeneration of the body as we get older because it's not a perfect world. But he went on to describe all these beautiful phenomenon that exists in our world, and we ridiculed him as being foolish. But now, when we look back, we can see that as the wiser you get, the more we realize how little we knew back then. And even Einstein, the great genius, and other great geniuses of science have stated that there must be a God, must be a creator, because the design, the grand design, is so clear and so amazing.
It's spooky clear to me. I mean, the order, the creation of the universe. I mean, from a big bang, as they call it, from just one particle of matter, and everything sprung from that. I mean, that's just crazy talk, unless you take into account a higher intelligence, something that we simply don't understand. There's no way that we could possibly understand the intelligence that created this universe and everything around us and us.
Right, and according to the scriptures, again, I'm convinced myself. I've seen the evidence that supernatural power is speaking to men, prophets that he chose to record it in this Bible and pass it on to us. And the supernatural power is saying that I love you so much. His love is so infinite for all of us whom he created. And we could see the love when we see all the things he's given us as food that are both delicious and nutritious, and the shade and the skies and the shade trees and the flowers. And we could see the love bestowed upon us in so many countless ways. And we know he loves us, and he is offended by the fact that we just grab all of these wonderful gifts and just enjoy ourselves and still disregard his existence and pretend that he's not there. If you watch the way people live, they just live enjoying all the great benefits that were given, can only have come and be created by some powerful being, because no man can create not even a speck of dust. So everything from a speck of dust to the entire world and all the beautiful things within it were created by some supernatural power whom we fail to recognize. And this is our punishment. And it's not really punishment in the sense God is forcing us through fear to embrace him, simply in our minds. And that's the communion. The only communion we can have right now is in our minds with God. It's a thought relationship, and it means giving up the pleasures, not the pleasures, no, we still enjoy the pleasures, but giving up all the other activities of our mind, the aimless mind wandering, the silly nonsense that we get our minds involved in. Even when we're silent, our minds wander in hapless and disorganized and fruitless directions, don't they? That's the way the human mind works. But God says if we just continue, if we keep our minds tuned to his presence, sort of like a radio receiver is tuned to a transmission from a distant source, then we can hear the voice of God or the thoughts of God. Not the voice, but the thoughts of God in our hearts. And that is essentially what worship is, where the highest greatest motive in our minds is to commune and to be tuned to that invisible presence.
Yeah.
And then those people will be saved, he says.
And I think, in closing for tonight, I think there's 2 points that I would make. I saw, and I see so many things, and I get so much information these days from doing this show. I saw somebody, and I don't even remember if I saw them in person or if I saw it on television or heard it on the radio, but it seems like the people that are woken up, the people that are use their brains instead of sitting in front of the idiot box munching potato chips and watching football games, the people that actually utilize their brains. This person seems to think that those people are the ones that are going to be saved. And I have to agree with that on some point, on some level, because, I mean, you think about the sheer multitude of people that are just sitting around their houses, playing their Xboxes and their PlayStations, and watching television, and just sitting around just having sheer entertainment instead of actually taking anything seriously. And those are the people that I truly, truly feel sorry for, because they're going to be so unprepared when this happens.
Yes, that's right. And also they'll be unprepared when they pass away. Even if they were to pass, we all pass away, even if we've had a life of abundance and comfort and carelessness, we still pass away, and those who have not communed with that spirit who created us will be gone forever. They will die forever and cease to exist. Whereas those who commune with that spirit who created us are told in the scriptures that they will have a new life with a new body, because it's not just that we're not just a plasma spirit that floats around like an ether, but we are a spirit that is true, intangible right now, but it's housed within a body. And the new body that we will have a new body, because the spirit needs a body to dwell in. But that body will be indestructible, and it will live forever, and the earth that we live on will be devoid of all evil and pain. This is what the scriptures promise from God through his prophets, that he will wipe away every tear. So why not strive for that goal by keeping the mind focused and giving up the frivolities of life, the wastefulness that are taking us to that point of death, which will be eternal non-existence, and rather reach toward our minds and strive toward communion with God, the greatest miracle, and get to know and explore the miracles that lie ahead, and a new, indestructible, eternal body that awaits us in the next forever life.
Yeah, whether that's the next cycle of life or after we die, we know that is in fact the promise. I mean, if you're going to look at the Bible as a historical record, you have to also look at the Bible as a spiritual record too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you read about it. God is expressing his love for us, and his way is constantly trying to bring us back to him and to leave our frivolous worship of other. He calls it idol worship, where men worship women. Let's face it. We worship the opposite sex. It's part of our nature. We also worship wealth, and we worship our own egos. I know I've been like that all my life. Self-centered, worshiping looking only for what kind of achievements I could make, and what kind of recognition I could get. And wealth was not that important to to me, but still I had many false idols, just as we all do. And if we all ignored that one idol that we should be worshiping, the one who created us. But it's not just we're not giving up our lives in worshiping him. It's receiving a great, great benefit that you cannot imagine. That comes. It's hard to describe, but the payment that you get for worshiping God is so much more glorious than any personal achievement that we strive for, because all of these things that we selfishly strive for in life are empty, turn out to be empty rewards, because they are self-worship. And self-worship doesn't bring us close to what we are destined to be, and that is God. We are destined to be God, a part of God. But not now. We're not capable of that. But he will make us a part of him, so his reward will be far greater than any investment we ever make in our worship of him.
And I think that is a appropriate way to end the show for the night. That is something that I think everybody really needs to think about, John. I hopefully people who listen to the archive of the show and listen to this show actually make it to the end, because I think this is the most important part of everything that we've said tonight. I mean, yeah, there's going to be disasters, but there's hope too.
Yes, this could be the greatest challenge and the greatest light at the end of our tunnel of life that we could ever imagine. It could bring us eternal life. These coming disasters could be the force behind eternal life for many of us.
Yeah.
Fear bringing us closer to God.
You gotta think that this cycling of this Planet X coming through the solar system, it from the historical records that we've seen from the Colburn Bible and the Tales of Atlantis and everything else, it always seems to happen when the people are most involved with idolatry.
Right, when man has gotten to his most ruinous degree of destruction.
Isn't that the most bizarre thing?
God comes in and forces them out of fear to either turn to him or be destroyed.
Isn't that the most bizarre aspect of all of this? I mean,
What happened with Atlantis? Oh, excuse me, Bill. Well, could you chat for a while? I'll be back in 1 minute.
Okay, we're going to end the show anyways, John, okay?
Oh, okay.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let you go, and I will be in touch in the next couple of days, okay?
Thanks very much, Bill. I appreciate you having me to discuss this with you and your audience.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, and God bless you, sir.
May God bless you too, Bill, and your audience.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And there we go, folks. We've been looking at the waterfall there for a little while because after all of the gloom and doom, we got to get over that gloom and doom a little bit. That was John Dinardo. It has been another 3-hour marathon show. This one I think has been the most rewarding for myself personally because it was just a good conversation with a good friend of the show. We think alike. We had no script whatsoever. We didn't even hardly talk about what we were going to talk about tonight. We just kind of freewheeled the whole thing. So anyways, my name is Bill Xam. Thank you for watching. We will have this up on YouTube, and hopefully YouTube won't claim copyright privileges over this show like they have on some of our past shows. And the audio will be available, and it will begin streaming on the audio stream server in a moment, and it will begin streaming on the video side in a moment also. Thanks for watching. My name is Bill Xam. Have a good evening, and see you guys later.